have the answer. This and no, keep us together. Bring us closer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Durability Summit hosted by Google and InfoTrust. My name is Pat McInerney, and I'm on the partnerships team at InfoTrust, and looking forward to spending the next couple hours with you. So what is this term durability that everyone keeps using all about? So I first heard the term durability in this context probably midway through 2020. And admittedly, I didn't really understand why it was being used in discussions about privacy and first-party data. But as I spent more time talking with customers about this and hearing from some thought leaders and experts, many of whom will be on the call today, it became more clear to me why durability is really an appropriate term to be used when we're discussing all the changes that are happening. So when you think about changes to legislation, changes to technology and browsers that are limiting use of third-party cookies, evolution of platforms like GA4, which is privacy-centric, consumer trends where they're expecting more transparency and really demanding trust from the brands that they work with, and quite frankly, a whole lot of uncertainty. That's a really good case for using the term durability. So in this environment, marketers are really required to build data collection processes, practices, build their marketing capabilities, and really leverage the right technologies that can provide them the ability to navigate these times of uncertainty. And that's what the summit's really all about today. So we have a great lineup of speakers today. This is truly a joint partnership between Google and InfoTrust. And we also have a special guest speaker from one of our clients as well at L'Oreal. And in terms of brain power and thought leadership, this is off the charts. So buckle up for really a fantastic day of content. So this is our third formal analytics-focused summit that InfoTrust and Google has hosted in the past 12 months. So in our last summit in February, which was retail-focused, we made the statement, well, I made the statement that our next summit was going to be in person. Unfortunately, we're still not to the point where we can bring everyone together, but we didn't want to delay this event because it is such an important topic. And as you can see on the next slide, with all the great brands that we have, this is really top of mind for a lot of people. So we're really excited to have all these folks here. Every summit we have to shrink the logos so they fit on the slide. So I think our next summit, we might have to go to 2 or 3 slides. But again, thank you all for being here. Just a quick public service announcement before we get into the housekeeping items. So if there are other people from your organization that you think would benefit from this content, now is a great time to hit them up in chat and send them the link to this summit. If you have team members, counterparts, other leaders in your organization that you think will benefit from this content, please reach out and get them on this call as soon as possible. So a few housekeeping items. In chat, you're going to see a link to a form where you can register for a free copy of InfoTrust's best-selling book called Crawl, Walk, Run. You can also enter for a chance to win a Peloton. And I have confirmed this is a brand new Peloton, not slightly used. So please fill that form out. You do need to stay for the entire time to be eligible to win the Peloton. Please be active in the chat session as well throughout the day. I want to take you now through the agenda. So again, I mentioned we have a fantastic lineup. Starting with our keynote, we'll be doing a fireside chat with Sean and Michael. Then Cassidy and Lucas will be talking about privacy-centric advertising. Lauren and Ariel will then be talking about activation strategies. Around 1 o'clock, we're going to switch the focus to data collection with Isaac, Amin, and Michelle. Around 1:40, we'll be talking about data collection which will be focused more on engineering, data science, machine learning with Maritsa, Pam, and Tyler. And then we're going to be wrapping the day up with Jeremy and Michael again joining us to do a recap of key learnings. And then on to the Peloton. And again, you have to be present to win at the end. So I know that's why everyone's here in addition to the durability content, but please stay for the whole time. It's going to be a great day. So I want to introduce our keynote speaker. We're really honored to have an incredible keynote speaker in Sean Downey. Sean's a vice president of platforms for the Americas. He's a 20-year veteran of display advertising, starting his career back in the 90s when the cookie was first invented. He spent his first spent 4.5 years at DoubleClick prior to the Google acquisition, where he led agency and advertiser business. And in his current role at Google, he partners with advertisers to drive adoption and usage of technology to achieve their business objectives. He's passionate about driving digital transformation for his clients, and he's known for his commitment to developing his people and building an inclusive culture. And then joining Sean from InfoTrust, an equally inspirational person, our Chief Growth Officer, Michael Loban, who's been really on the forefront of helping our partners develop their durable strategies as well. So Michael, I'll kick it over to you and let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Pat. Thank you everyone for joining. Sean, welcome.
Thanks, Michael. Really excited to be here. Pat, I too wish to be in person next time. I think we're getting close, so keep our fingers crossed and maybe we'll be able to do this face-to-face next time. But thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So Sean, we have a full day planned ahead. As Pat mentioned, a lot of topics are going to be discussed today. But before we dive into tools and solutions and first-party data, I wanted to ask you just a couple of questions about marketers' mindset and strategy. Certainly, there are a lot of changes that are happening in the marketing ecosystem. We are talking about regulatory changes. We are talking about technology changes. We are talking about changes in consumer interest and demands and their focus in privacy. Certainly, there is quite a bit that is happening and changing right now. How can everyone stay optimistic and opportunistic when the environment is changing so much?
Well, I'm a disruptor by nature. That's what I do. That's what I've made my career on, and I think that's what makes companies great. So I actually look at this as a really exciting moment in time for all of us, because together we can actually build a durable and future-oriented ecosystem that we all need to operate in and define what the next 25 years of digital advertising will look like. So I'm always trying to get advertisers and marketers and publishers and agencies to think about what's the benefit that we can gain from adopting new technology and new principles and tactics that will last and actually bring brand value. That said, I get it. Like, I know it's a tough landscape. It's shifting at a pace that's never before been seen. And this is a market that's changed a lot in 25 years, but it's moving as fast as it ever has. And it has a lot of people on edge. And the one thing I hear most from customers is that they're overwhelmed by it. And it's important to just recognize and be empathetic that there's good reason to be. A future without cookies is disruptive for how everyone's operation is set up. but it's a necessary and long overdue change. We have to embrace that, and that's what helps us stay optimistic, because the most important thing that we have in every business is our consumers and the trust that they put in our brands. So how we treat them and how we make sure their experience is amazing and delivers value is the most important thing that any marketer could do. So you have to think about, how do I make that consumer experience valuable, long-lasting, and productive, that's going to last. And it's really clear that we need to shift to do it. So if we start thinking about the future and how we bring value to the marketplace and value to our brands and value, most importantly, to people, that helps us get our head around the change that has to occur. And the last thing that's really important there is we're not alone. Like, this is happening to everyone. Like, so it's not happening to Google, or it's not happening to InfoTrust, or it's not happening to L'Oreal. It's happening to everyone. Everyone's faced with the same challenges. Nothing is proven to be what's going to work in the future. All the tactics are being, made up in real time to make sure that they're durable, and all the value is yet to be discovered. So leaning into that is a really huge opportunity for companies to get it right and be on the cutting edge of innovation as they go forward.
Absolutely. I love that. And a lot of times when I meet with partners and our clients, I mention the same thing, right? It happens to everyone, right? So you are not alone in this. Together we'll figure it out. But when we are looking at the technologies that are going to last, right? You've mentioned what's going to generate value in the future. What are some of the key trends that you are paying attention to? What do you see possibly as fads, or maybe some things that are not likely to stay, versus things that we really should put our money on, if you will?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that as we answer that question, it's important to think about the other mindset that's really important for decision makers and executives in the marketplace today. And that's the mindset of being a truth seeker. Here at Google, we're truth seekers. I'm a truth seeker. I'm looking for what's happening around me that gives the answers to how you should be investing your time, your strategy, your energy. And that means you have to seek out hard truths, not just truths that are convenient to you, but the things that you might not like to know, that tell you, a pretty rosy picture sometimes and a pretty tough picture other times. And I think there are three truths that you really need to think about to answer the question that you've asked. The first one is, as a company, as a brand, is the consumer at the center of your strategy? Because they should be. Because if you don't respect your consumer, you risk your relationship with them. And let's remember what a consumer is. The consumer is your grandmother, your neighbor, yourself. They're people, right? People care a lot about privacy. Go look up the stats. There's plenty of them out there. Pew Research has said 4 out of 5 don't trust how their data is used. Axios has a similar strategy. It says they don't trust who's being shared with. Right? So it's clear that you have to tackle things that provide people-oriented trust. Right? So you have to make sure you're thinking long-term, that you're respecting that opportunity, because anything that's not respecting consumer transparency, control, and choice, and good user experience won't last. Right? So it's really important that you don't replicate things that already happen and say that they don't like. That's a really important thing. The other thing is you have to start thinking of long-term. Right. So many of us are short-term thinkers, because we say something's breaking, let me go do the next thing. And I like to say the path of least resistance is most often the path without wisdom. Like, we're not changing a technology policy in the marketplace. We're reshaping how an ecosystem works. So the hard truth that a marketer needs to see is that this marketplace has operated on a cookie economy since 1995. And it wasn't even intentional. It was co-opted. It's changing. It has to be reinvented. And if you don't progress, you'll replicate the past and you'll be replacing something else 2 to 3 years down the line. So that's a really important truth to know. And then you have to make sure you think about, are you in a culture where it's okay to fail or okay to learn? Right? Because the truth is, you have to get comfortable with rapid innovation at this time. And there's a lot of technology that's innovative. There's a lot of policies that are innovative. There's a lot of new tracking methodologies and measurement methodologies that are innovative. That means experimentation, innovation, and failure. Right? You have to be comfortable with that. And the hard truth is, if you're not comfortable with that, or you're afraid of failure and you can't innovate because of that, you'll get caught flat-footed a year from now. So every marketer needs to understand those truths. And then the answers are kind of there for you already, right? So we've made decisions based on that. Once third-party cookies are phased out, others are offering a level of user tracking through ID-based scenarios. We're not. That could be like PII graphs based on people's email addresses. It's really simple for us. We don't think they'll meet the rising people-based expectations for privacy or meet the fast rising regulatory environments that exist around the globe. And we don't think they're sustainable. We don't think they're sustainable because they replicate cross-site tracking, right? And cookie deprecation is not about cross-site tracking. They're not about cookies. It's about cross-site tracking, right? So how are you changing the way that actually works for us? So that didn't feel like a good, sustainable investment that could help us focus on more important strategic things in the future, like the rise of e-commerce that became very digital oriented this year, grew 10 points in the United States, or the rise of connected television, all the networks are moving their TV online, right? Those are really important things to build against versus just doing privacy fixes every 6 months. So we've chosen a long-term path. Like we think privacy preserving APIs represent something of a futuristic that's going to help us track advertisers in large cohorts, aggregate them, but still deliver results. We think the advent of machine learning and modeling is really important because you can find tremendous insights that human eyes can't see. And we think there's still a massive place for first-party data activities because you can't repeat or replace something that matters for your consumers, but you do that with consent, with user experience and journey. And anything else that's out there that's hacking it together or replicating cross-site tracking or not having proper consent models, I think is going to be challenged.
And something that you've mentioned, the rise of e-commerce, I think when we start thinking this is like a marketing apocalypse that's coming, I think it's important to remember, right, e-commerce is on the rise. It's never been higher than before. It means that consumers are spending money. Consumers are going to our websites. Consumers are going to apps, digital properties, and they're buying products. Hence, there is a massive opportunity for us to present our best case for those dollars.
Yeah, if you're a retailer and you're in e-commerce, the United States economy went from 15% digital to 25%. And there's lots of headroom. It's 32% in China. And we saw how reliant we became on it as people in a pandemic. So it's really important. So that there you have choices, right? So our choice was develop week to week, quarter to quarter. And if you've been following all the trends as I have, you look at what Apple's doing, with iOS, with intelligent tracking. You look at Chrome browsers, you look at other browsers. We spent a ton of resources just fixing things that were broken. And we'd much rather build for space. And if we build for space that's durable, privacy sensitive, we can really lean into making e-commerce work better for marketers and publishers. And we can lean into other things that we think have actual step change for performance versus just trying to make things interoperable because they were last year.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned about being a truth seeker, which I really liked, and I just want to make sure that I personally and maybe attendees have captured the three key pillars. People first strategy, think long term, and really cultivate the culture where it is okay to fail.
You got it. Those are I feel the most important ones.
Excellent. Now, let's talk about the last one, okay to fail, because it feels like a lot of organizations speak about it, but there is still an opportunity to do better in terms of execution. So how do companies, organizations cultivate that culture of experimentation and testing, especially when we know that some of the solutions that are emerging maybe are not yet ready or might go away, but we still need to play with them and get comfortable with trying them out?
Yeah, it's a critical problem that faces companies, and most often people are open to experimentation and change when it's staring them in the face and they don't have any other time, or they have to evolve, or they risk failure immediately. It's really hard to create that culture with a long window. So you start thinking about that has to come from the top. Like the company, the CMO, the CEO has to be really, really comfortable with rapid innovation as a cultural thing. They have to be comfortable that experimentation derives future benefit. And then they have to be comfortable that not every idea is good, right? So they're going to see failure in that model, and they just have to accept that as they start to experiment. And large scale testing is not a technical thing, right? It's a cultural thing, right? So you have to start thinking about those. And it's possible to do because, we're sitting here in a virtual conference, right? Which weren't really working that well last year. They work really well right now. Lots of businesses were faced with changing and evolving or facing significant damage to their bottom line, right? So that onset of the pandemic forced leaders and their organizations to experiment with, I would say, unprecedented intensity, right? Whether that was reconfiguring existing work environments, as most of us did, reapplying a storefront business to a digital business, going into new markets, developing new skills for their capacity, and developing new product lines. And they all did it because they had to come together and they had to trial things, right? So the trick for many of our customers is, how do you do that all the time? Right. Why does it take a global health pandemic to get us all to get along and get onto experimentation, right? But it's really possible to do. And we can learn a lot from these things. So if you've done it once, you then realize the transformative power that exists with a sustained commitment. And then it's just about experimentation in small increments. One experiment leads to thousands, and that small changes leads to big changes over time. And it's a really good thing to embrace. The principles I use in my organization is we fail forward on everything. There's no such thing as failure in my team. There's only fabulous failure. What didn't work? Tell me what you learned and tell me what you're going to do next. And as we started going into this marketplace around cookieless future, we have an entire learning agenda that I asked my marketing science team to produce. And their goal was to fail 5 of the 10 experiments in the first quarter, because they see the value in actually learning something on their hypothesis with real knowledge to adapt it, right? So it becomes, what are you gaining from experimentation and from failure? And it's really important that we embrace this at this time, because we're doing something we've never done with customers. We're accused of dropping blog posts and telling you that we changed something yesterday and please adapt, right? We do that to customers all the time, and they hate it, and they should. This time, we've put the blinker on for 20 blocks. This is what's happening. This is our rough plan to get there. Here's how you should start thinking about experimentation. Here's how you should start thinking about durability. Here's some tests you can start to experiment with. Take advantage. Because the companies that do that and they structure onto at really small investment levels, gain a 12-month head start on the marketplace. And that is going to result in bigger profits or bigger sustainability of your current output, which is super critical. You should be thinking about, how do I protect my business results and grow them 12 months from now? And you do that by doing small things now, right? And being not afraid to fail, not afraid to gain, but getting better month after month.
I like that you mentioned small tests, because I think if the organization gets more and more comfortable with putting together small tests and small experimentation, that reinforces the culture of experimentation. A lot of times we see companies as we are experimenting and they put together one big test. It does not go as well as they planned. Okay, and the culture of experimentation goes out the window. But if you do it consistently, it becomes really a habit of experimentation, then your culture continues to evolve as well.
Right. And that goes back to, that's tied to long-term thinking, right? So if you fall victim to, I call it short-termism, you will never make gains, because you can't fail. You have to deliver the same results as you did last week. You can't try something new, because any deviation is bad, right? So you have to have a long-term view to do exactly what you just said.
So maybe we can drive the message home even a little bit more. What qualities do you think successful digital leaders share, and who do you think is getting it right? Or what are the attributes of getting it right?
Yeah, there's a lot of great companies that embrace a lot of the mindsets that we've been talking about. And it's really hard to point to like one silver bullet that any of them actually do. But what they really do is they do a lot of things really well all the time. They do it repeatedly. And we're seeing companies like L'Oreal, who you have speaking, Nespresso, Sephora, and many others do the right things. And they're very intentional about their strategies. That's a really important word to think about as well, is what's the intention of what you're doing and why, right? These companies are obtaining and they're maintaining the commitment to data analytics across all levels of their organization. Knowledge is power. As data becomes harder to parse together and you get more gaps in it, what's your historical view on it? How can you actually model prediction against that? What does a good customer look like? Those are all really important things that are living and breathing that you have to invest in. It's not just about collection and ingestion, it's about doing something with it. They practice experimentation and modeling all the time. They have lots of little experiments running all the time, and they're constantly putting new solutions to the test to see if they can benefit the business. If you don't have an A/B culture, you don't have a testing culture. And all those companies have A/B testing cultures, and they're looking for incremental benefit over the last thing that they did because they're never satisfied. They've got really strong data governance across their data and their tools, which I know you guys are going to talk about because it is an asset.
Absolutely.
It needs to be valued. They measure their investment in analytics and how it impacts the bottom line. Like the smartest companies don't think about identity. They think about the value of identity. What is that is the value I place in identity to learn about incremental benefit to my company? So there's value in every analytics project. And more importantly, they focus on what I like to call the last mile. Right? So they embed their analytics into the core of every marketing function and every marketing decision, because the benefit of experimentation and cultural change around analytics is you learn something and you apply it as fast as you can, right? And that means those teams have to be integrated in some form or fashion. Either they sit next to each other, they report to the same person, or they have checkboxes where they have to talk to each other. There's different ways of doing that. And that's being done at scale. One really good example, you guys do this really well at InfoTrust, is one of the largest B2B retailers in the United States works with you at InfoTrust and is already experimenting in multiple ways. They're taking server-side tag management services, they're working with data clean rooms, and they're completing a GA4 deployment that is a more durable view of app and web environments for analytics. And they really started by basic things. What's the risk assessment of my current state? And then I knew what parts of my business are impacted. Are you able to work with them to show them the beginning how they start to begin to experiment with new solutions that are going to address their biggest needs and that are likely to impact their bottom line the most? And that's a really good process to go through now, because everyone wants to jump into like testing of new solutions. They want to jump into sandboxes, right? I want people to peel themselves back and start from the beginning and assess everything that they're doing with a good partner that can help them assess it. Think about what's sustainable and durable and what's not. What information they need to know that they don't know today in the future, what experiments they need to set up, and then what changes to their infrastructure do they need to do to be ready for the future. And now in the beginning of this transition, it's about remodeling your kitchen, right? Not moving into your new house, right? And because that will happen later. Like we'll remodel the kitchen now, run good experiments, and then we'll have a completed, view of the world in 12 plus months. And, partners, you guys are doing an amazing job, I think, of doing that with your customers. And that's just one really good example.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And again, just to summarize a couple of key points that you mentioned, because there's so much good information. You mentioned, let's start with the right intent, right? Have this culture of practicing and experimentation, then focusing on value and what is the incremental benefit for our business, and that last mile, right? So we don't just build the dashboards or reports that kind of sit out there, but how do I give every person within my organization analytics that they can embed into their day-to-day activities?
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. And then you evolve for your own cultural needs. You'll figure those out. But those are the bedrocks of all the great companies.
Fantastic. So let's switch gears for a little bit. I know we have about 10, 15 more minutes. And we covered quite a bit about strategy, but I'm sure the question that is on the minds of many people is around the technology and the tools. The summit is about adapting to changes and building analytics practice that will stand the test of time, hence Durability Summit. So what does the modern digital analytics stack look like to you? And how does cloud fit into that stack?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a fast evolving pace, right? So I think there's components that matter. There's your baseline infrastructure that you have to have. And I think it's really important that you start with a foundation that is first party oriented, right? So as we're starting to leverage the future, you have to be first party durable. So, we look at things like a site-wide tag management system. Like we have one Google tag, for example. It's a really strong structure. We think GA4, Google Analytics 4 is a really solid foundation because it allows you to do first-party measurement across multiple dynamics on your website to understand audiences and behavior and trends, et cetera. And I think getting into connecting that data to your enterprise is really important. And that's where kind of cloud starts to go in because you can start to leverage big processing around things like BigQuery. You can start to play with modeling activities that start to take that data and crunch it a little bit differently. So at a core, those foundations exist. And then you have to really have a good modeling and insights topping. And that's either you're using scale technology to do it. You could use data visualization tools. You could use machine learning APIs, et cetera. You need a partner or a marketing science group that's actually getting benefit from those areas. So they're making sure that they can actually get insights and model. And then there's a connectivity to activation, or the last mile, as we just called it. So all those things connected to your buying tools, right? So your search bidding engines or your display bidding engines that multiple people have. And can you output that for insights to go back to the enterprise for other things like what's happening on our site for content or pricing strategies or customer value? Those all have to start to play together, right? So if I was going to summarize, you have a big data collection and ingestion function, you have a strong insights and modeling function, and you have a way to pass that intelligence for quick activation in the enterprise or externally in an advertising campaign. And that's a really good way to think about it. I think the things that you play with, like there's going to be, assets or inputs that matter that stay the test of time are threefold. One is your first party data is never more important. Right? And by first party data, I mean direct one-to-one consented relationship. Like we're in the middle of a pandemic. I am probably Lululemon's greatest customer. I love athleisure. Like I got an athleisure shirt on right now because they're super comfortable. And I want Lululemon to know what I like because I want the best things. I don't need anyone else to know that I'm not buying their stuff from, right? So there's value in me giving information to Lululemon. There's less value in me giving it to, a big box retailer in that scenario, right? From that level, it's really important that you start to have that. So cultivating that, understanding your customers, developing a user experience that matters and leaning into it with them, super critical, and it's going to have a huge role for us. And, all the metrics tell you anyways, that works way better now than third-party cookies, right? And all the smart marketers already know that. So keep leaning into that because that world still exists. And you can cultivate those insights with the foundation that I gave you. Then you want to make sure you can leverage automation, machine learning, cloud solutions, because that combination that we just talked about builds your insights, helps you measure future performance in ways that are much more granular than campaign performance, and then lets you adopt it at scale. Like there's a huge power in learning something unique and then making sure that funnels through your entire advertising campaign to produce better campaigns. Automated targeting, smart bidding, conversion modeling to make sure you're doing the right things. There's a tremendous way to scale performance. And the one thing I want customers to think about is value is not derived from the identity. Value is derived from what you do with it to produce better results, right? So the power of your modeling, your insights, and your automation and your tools that help you create scale drives better performance than just identity by itself. Right? Identity is an input. Right? So it's really important that you start thinking about those. And then, of course, we'll play with the efficacy and effectiveness of privacy-preserving APIs like Sandbox. Those are experiments. They're tests. Early tests are pretty good about showing that they show strong affinity. Many of our marketers have used cohort marketing forever. It works pretty well. And I think cohorts work really well. But you can expand on them. And that's where you're going back to automation and insights because you're trying to learn what works and what lookalikes mean and how you grow your business versus just talking to the same people. So that kind of gives you like a soup to nuts view from the bottom of things that I think are going to stay, they're going to scale, You need to create experimentation plans against those, and you need to make sure you can operate with.
So you've mentioned first-party data, certainly an absolute pillar when it comes to a durable strategy. But it would be short-sighted of me, probably while I have you, not to dig a little bit deeper into first-party data. And a thing that comes to mind is a lot of times when I'm online and I visit, let's say, an e-commerce website that I've not been to, I get immediate messages, get $5 off, get $10 off, get 20% off, just provide us with an email address. And it feels like they probably understand the importance of having first-party data, but I'm not sure if all of them have the strategy of how much first-party data is actually worth to them and what they will do with activating that. So how do we avoid the mistake of overspending on data acquisition without a clear understanding about what to do next?
No, it's a really good question, because everyone is on a race. I think you described it really well, to collect first-party data.
Yep.
Because it's the asset that, that's durable, right? And that's easy for some. Like if you're Amazon, it's easy to collect first-party data. It's an easy value exchange. You give me your email address and your credit card, I ship you a box in 2 days, right? And there's value, and then I show you other stuff that you might want to buy, and I can ship you another box. Really simple value proposition that scales. A consumer packaged good company, not so clear. Like, what's the value proposition, right? But everyone's trying to get as many names as possible from that regard, and that's a watch out for us. And I think people are working through this framework. I think the thing I would try and anchor on as a marketer is going back to something that I kind of threw out there in the middle of a different answer is, what is the value of that first-party data that you're gaining, or the value of that identity? Because it's going to be different for every brand. Right. So a really good example is you could be like a Lululemon. Like there's a really good athleisure company out there I won't name. That's not them. That's doing a really good job with this. They, they're in a boom time because the pandemic. People want this stuff. They've done the email offers that you suggested. They've collected discounts for people, but they don't just treat it like remarketing, because I think what you're getting at, Michael, is the curse is that we just hit people over the head for what they did last time, right? Exactly. And we do more of that, or we give them a coupon to buy more of what they did last time. And that's really not the value that you have of first-party data. The actual value is if I could place a monetary value on what that customer is worth to me, and I have really tailored specific objectives with what I want to drive with them, I can measure the incremental benefit to my business of a logged in first-party data customer. Think lifetime value, think broader shopping cart experience, think understanding frequency of communications that you've referenced, versus just broad-based prospecting, right? And you can start to be really clear about how often do they need to hear from me, what types of things really matter, and does it provide incremental return versus just using something more broad, like a cohort thing. And that's a really tough experiment to run, but it's a really valuable experiment to run. And this company runs tens of experiments a day against that, because they don't want to over flood it. Like nobody wants that to become email marketing, which is, we all have like email inboxes that are crazy, right? So that's a really important thing. I think the other thing is it's not just a marketing vehicle, right? So sometimes your first-party data is used to tailor the content or the experience on your website, right? That is the doorway. That is your storefront to the world, right? You spend all this money driving people that theoretically fit the profile of what you want to your website. That is the golden jewel of first-party data. Could tailor that experience to be really useful, because that's why people want to give you stuff, right? Because they want it to be useful to them, valuable to them, and on point, and they actually expect it from you to give it to them. So companies need to be very thoughtful about how that fits into content from that area. So if you've got that lens, you'll be more clear about what you're getting, why you're getting, what do you think it's worth to you, and you'll treat it a little bit more preciously, because you'll understand how to extract the proper value from it versus just beating it up like a remarketing list. Because there's lots of ways to prospect, and there's lots of ways to drive mass traffic to your website that don't require personalization or someone giving you data and feeling like it's overused.
And I really like that idea of value and long-term thinking, right, about your customers, about your audience, not just how do I extract another sale from them, but really how do I build that partnership with my end consumer. Last question for you, Sean. We have the next few hours that we'll spend with the summit attendees. What would you ask of our audience today? What would you like for them to learn or do at the end of the session?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think I'll go back to what you asked me at the beginning, Michael. Many people, and rightfully so, are really nervous about the future. And they're really nervous because they haven't seen, because we haven't had to do it, that they can drive performance differently. Or that if you take away something, they're not going to perform as well, and that's going to hurt their company, it's going to hurt their OKRs, et cetera. So I want to enforce one really critical message that I tell customers and my team all the time. And if you take nothing else away from today, I hope that you write this thing down. If you didn't take any notes, it's a powerful, short sentence. Performance is not at odds with privacy. You can have your cake and eat it too. They go hand in hand. So I'm going to say it again. Actually, you can all close your eyes. You can feel a little meditative. You can chant it to yourself. Performance is not at odds with privacy. Performance is not at odds with privacy, right? It's important to know that because performance is not predicated solely on one-to-one precision targeting. We've talked about advances in aggregation in this. We've talked about anonymization, on-device processing. All these other technologies drive performance today for you. You just don't notice because we're all worried about the data. Right? So it's important that we embrace that. We embrace where technology is going. We embrace people in their right for privacy, but we also know we can drive tremendous performance for our customers and for our businesses, right? And we all have a role to play in that, right? We don't know all the answers yet as a group. It's a big coalition for us, but it's really important because privacy is not a technology differentiator or an aspiration held by a few of us. It kind of just should be, right? So as a marketplace, we have to make sure it just is, and we still find ways to drive performance. And if we work together to do that, we'll drive and we'll embrace a really bold future. And I'm a huge fan. I'm a disruptor at heart, and I think it's always the right time to be bold and brave. And I want people to remember, lean in right now because they're not at odds with each other.
Exactly. Well, you said that performance, I will repeat it, performance is not at odds with privacy, and it's important to start and begin experimentation, or as you mentioned, possibly beginning with doing an assessment and really understanding where your organization is right now and where it needs to get to really become durable and build a stack that will last. Sean, thank you so much. This has been tremendous. I have pages of notes. Really appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you for having me, Michael, and for InfoTrust for putting on the summit. I hope everyone enjoys the day. It looks like a great agenda for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you, Michael. That was awesome. Aside from the great content that we heard, I now have some new phrases I can start using, like short-termism, fabulous failure, the blinker is on. I think Sean said something about performance is not at the odds of privacy. Hopefully I got that right. I'm going to make a t-shirt out of that one. So reminder to please, again, fill out the form in the chat box so we know you're here. We're going to take a 10-minute break. And if you are a truth seeker, we'll see you back here at 11:55. And looking forward to continuing the session. Thanks. We'll see you in a little bit. Hey everyone, we are back. Thanks for sticking with us. For our second session, we are welcoming Lucas Long, a product specialist from our TagInspector team. And he is joined by Cassidy Sehgal, who we just found out has a new title. So congratulations, Cassidy. She's Senior Vice President of Data Governance. And they're at L'Oreal. And their session is aptly titled, Being a Privacy-Centric Advertiser in an Acronym-Heavy World, or an AHW as I call it, Lucas. So I will turn that over to you, and looking forward to the session.
Amazing. Thank you, Pat. And so, yeah, we wanted to kind of introduce more of the compliance side of things here. So what does it take to be a successful advertiser and keeping privacy really at the core of all of the different aspects that we're doing? Now, we're seeing, as Michael and Sean talked about in that first session, all kinds of changes from GDPR, CCPA, regulatory changes, as well as things like ITP and the deprecation of third-party cookies within Chrome. And so how do we do this amongst all of these changes and really ensure that compliance moving forward? So kind of getting underway here, when we talk about those different changes on this next slide here, we're really talking about three primary things. So number one being consumer expectations and what it is that our users and our customers are expecting from us as brands. We're also seeing tons of changes and all kinds of restrictions being introduced as a result of regulatory updates. These are only happening more frequently across the globe. And then also those technical restrictions, as I just mentioned. Now, to start with those customer expectations and how those are changing, we're seeing a rise in digital maturity for users. Everyone now is just more online. And with that, they're expecting a lot of that personalization, that experience to be improved. I know for me personally, I get upset if something doesn't work properly on a website, or if I'm going to search for something and I can't find it. It's just the expectation that I have. But a lot of that in advertising and marketing more broadly has really relied on that personalization, that one-to-one piece. And as many organizations are really focusing on that, lost touch in a lot of senses with the privacy expectations of those users. As the sophistication and the understanding of users around the data practices that are going on, the profiling that's happening, targeting that's happening, have really increased, it has brought this large sea change, put that into place. So to ask Cassidy here, from that privacy perspective, what is really the number one thing in your mind that advertisers need to address in order to meet these rising consumer expectations here moving forward in this privacy-focused environment?
It's such a good question. And Lucas, the reality is that I'm going to stick to an old cliche, which is that you have to, say what you do and do what you say. And you mentioned the complexity of where we are. And I think it's actually harder than it's ever been because there is such a sophistication of the ecosystem. And it's not a singular, it's a plural, right? Because when we're talking about our consumers, we may be talking about how we engage with them in physical retail stores, online, and everything is data-driven. And it may be our marketing communications, our email communications, our serving of ads, our ads that they watch OTT. And so I think that given the complexity, we have to take a pause and we have to see how all the dots line up. And we also have to understand that it's not an easy one-size-fits-all. And so I think that, just really sticking to basics and really making sure that you actually know how you're doing what you're doing is really step one.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing way of really succinctly putting it. Saying what you do and then doing what you say. And a lot of those expectations, specifically around saying what you do, are enforced by some of these regulatory changes that are being introduced. Now, on this next slide, we kind of have just a very basic timeline here. And the biggest thing here, we started out even before GDPR with e-privacy, which has been around in Europe since the early 2000s. Those consent requirements as it relates to the accessing and the placement of cookies being really codified with those consent definitions within GDPR. And then GDPR, CCPA in the US, and even more state-specific laws. Just this week, the California state legislature putting on the governor's desk a new privacy legislation, for Colorado. We're seeing a lot of those principles for disclosure, requiring disclosure, requiring those access rights and things for users. With all of these different regulations, and especially with the patchwork kind of privacy approach in the US, if you had to distill really what's important for advertisers to know, point to 3 or 4 points, what would those be?
So I would add, before we even frame the 3 or 4 points, I would add that the consistency of transparency and notices is also going to be implicated, not just from the regulatory changes, but also from Apple, Google, the use of UID, the use of server integration, where you may be living in social. And so I think that what's going to be really, really important is being able to talk to the consumer with transparency in a consistent way and give them a consistent experience, knowing how fractured the environment is and knowing that we have states with different obligations. And so I think, the different obligations of the states could feel incredibly overwhelming. But if you start and your core is built on, your privacy house is built on really a thorough understanding of your data and a really great mapping, it makes the process of adjusting and pivoting for these different states a lot easier. It's funny, I just got off the phone from a call with my consumer care team that really is the sort of the front lines with dealing with the consumer. And we were joking about how now we've got Colorado too. And I think that what's exciting is that if you build that first house right, you really can continue to make improvements, but it really is about spending that time up front and really knowing where all that consumer data is, how you're going to pull it, and how you're going to address consumer rights depending on what they are, given the patchwork quilt.
So that's, I guess, a really interesting kind of concept, and one that is becoming even more challenging given the technical restrictions that are being imposed. So that consistency of data and being able to consistently have those conversations with an individual user across channels, across devices, they're kind of expecting now. With some of these technical changes that we will throw up on this timeline as well, specifically around the deprecation of third-party cookies and some of those duration restrictions that are being imposed on first-party cookies. The big implications there is that we lose that traditional way that advertisers and technologies have used to provide that unique anonymous ID for users that have not offered up or provided named information. So with those changes happening, and we're talking obviously a number of different sessions here around durable strategies and what's going to work in order to be able to successfully have that conversation and successfully understand those users here moving forward. There's a number of different approaches that a lot of vendors are coming to advertisers like L'Oreal with. People, solutions like the Privacy Sandbox, the privacy preserving APIs that Google and Chrome are putting forth, as well as a number of vendors that are talking about alternative IDs. And I'm sure from a privacy practitioner standpoint, people talk about probabilistic IDs, which is kind of a nightmare. But what are some of the core things as the advertisers that are joining us here today are vetting some of these new approaches and technologies? What should they really be keeping top of mind and considering as they're thinking through these new strategies to start using at their organization?
I think how we operationalize the solution is going to be really, really important. It gets really exciting to get involved in some of these conversations. There are so many different ones, and I think that really understanding what the implications are and how we can also hold our vendors accountable so that we are not, as advertisers, the ones that are left sort of holding the bag when the downstream activity doesn't match what the user expectation is. And I'm already seeing some real life examples of this. And I've been very passionate at the various trade associations where I'm very vocal on this point of advertisers need to get into each of these conversations, whether it's with Google or with Pram that's working on UID models or other server-to-server conversations, to make sure that we know how the supply chain works and who the parties are that are accountable, and that each is accountable, and that we're not the ones who are left with. I recently saw one vendor that will stay nameless, mention that in serving ads, that advertiser, that, the why you're getting this, the answer was because your advertiser has the right to sell their data to us. And that's a really terrible message. And that's not the way we want that's not the way that we're handling our relationship with our consumers or with our third parties. And so I think, I'm in a very roundabout way saying that we as advertisers need to hold everyone accountable. We need to jump in not only to understand what's being presented to us as potential solutions, but we also have to advocate on behalf of the consumer and the process to make the user experience really easy and understandable.
Yeah, no, certainly this makes a lot of sense. And that accountability piece for the vendors and the different platforms that we're working with, I think is really critical. It is also, as you mentioned, as mentioned in the first session, a lot of these approaches to the technical changes, they're happening in real time. We're in a very kind of unique environment right now where we have a say as advertisers, as the users of these platforms, in a way in which I don't know has always been the case. I mean, every technology obviously says that they're user-focused and they're wanting to embed their users in the design phases and everything. But the fact that everyone has kind of full visibility into what's going on, as well as those discussions for the solutions as they're being built, is a unique kind of situation that we find ourselves in. And I really like that kind of idea that is on us as advertisers to really put ourselves in those conversations to drive that future.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the most exciting thing from my perspective is that there was so much opacity in the environment for the last 10 or 15 years. And we really were taking our providers at their word, and there really wasn't a way to have accountability. And while I do think that we're going to see lots and lots of solutions, I actually think the exciting part is, as you mentioned, we can actually get in there with them and really drive for transparency even within the ecosystem.
Yep. So beyond just, I guess, being a part of those new solutions and helping to drive some of those new technologies, I also want to focus a little bit on what are the keys to success for us as advertisers as we're really approaching this. And if we jump forward a couple of slides here, and we start talking about our keys to success. And I know in conversations that we've had in the past, we've kind of distilled these down to really 3 core areas. With the first one being what you had alluded to earlier, really understanding the current state. So I know for us at InfoTrust, we always talk about people, platforms, and process. And so doing that evaluation to start understanding, given those changes that are happening, both regulatory and the requirements and disclosures that we need to be making to users, as well as those technical changes and the limitations with some of the strategies that are today reliant on specifically third-party cookies and those anonymous identifiers, taking really a good look at what are all of the things that we're doing today, what are the platforms that are in place in order to support those different strategies, and then how do the teams really work in order to support all of those activities as well. Getting all of that on the table, I kind of liken it to whenever you're moving or reorganizing, you take everything out, put it all on the floor. It's kind of a mess at first, but it provides that opportunity to really take stock, divide everything up, organize it, and then put it back in its truly proper place. Now, as organizations are working through that process of understanding their current state, what are the key pieces of information and the key pieces of documentation that if they don't have visibility into today, that they should really prioritize and put at the top of the list here moving forward?
So I'm really obsessed with data mapping now in a way I never was. And I feel like given, that, as you mentioned, everything is happening in real time, having a real snapshot and continuing, I mean, it's a living thing, right? So as things are changing, it makes it easier to unpack and move those pieces around, as you said. But you really need to start with that really great picture that has been truly, that really sort of lays out where everything is. Because I do think, Lucas, a lot of this is happening so fast that and nobody wants to miss a beat, and then add to it that it's all fractured, right? Like, so you're dealing with UIDs here, you're dealing with flock and fledge here, you're dealing with, and so you really have to have that understanding so that you can both allocate the resources that you will need initially to make sure you're doing it right, and so you don't have a big mishap.
Definitely makes sense. And I guess with that concept of data mapping, from your perspective, are there any aspects of that process that you've found to be really like a key? I know data mapping oftentimes can be very difficult because we can have visibility at the point of collection, but some of the downstream and some of these new concepts introduced by legislation, like the CPRA that are being introduced, that are talking about even secondary forms of processing down the line. I guess, what are some of the key areas for data mapping that you see that organizations and advertisers can really bring to the table?
So I think that probably the most painful thing is realizing that it doesn't stop. And so we have a relationship today, we map it. And like the beauty of innovation and being at a company like this where we are constantly doing something new and we have so many different ways of communicating with our consumers is that you may be our vendor and we may map you to do X. But as the evolution of our innovation happens, we have to keep coming back to it, right? And so I think that that's probably one of the hardest things to do, but it really is the key to privacy, right? Because it's not just one and done. It's not just a message on your website. It's really about, continuing to look at, see what you're doing, calibrate it, and make sure that you really are, walking the walk.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense with how everything is so dynamically changing. And it's not enough just to take that inventory or do that data map at one time and then, hey, we have it. I think we can dig it out. We did it 3 years ago. Now it should still be relevant. With technology and how fast it changes, it's such a dynamic process, which really gets to that second point there around those keys to success of embedding privacy into strategy as well as operations. So asking those questions, what information is collected, holding those vendors accountable, doing those data maps, understanding, what processing activities are we doing? What are we trying to get out of this? And concepts even like data minimization that are being introduced as a result of some of these new laws and regulations. So as far as those questions, what are things that advertisers should be asking of vendors, of other internal teams? The data folks maybe don't know what the marketers are doing down the line. So what questions should they be asking, and where should they be asking those questions in the process?
So that's such a good question, because it really has to start at the very inception of the project. And I think that's how you really build in privacy by design. But importantly, that's when you really have the attention of all of the teams. And it's not enough, as you said, to ask the folks that are managing the data. You really have to understand the expectations of the marketers about what their use case is, and sometimes really help them focus, right? I think that, it's one of the hardest things for me in my practice every day is saying, okay, this sounds great. We're going to run this campaign on, Triller, okay, so how does this work? And, it's actually the hardest part because I have not successfully figured out how to automate that. I think you really do have to have this human interaction, and often with the vendor too, because the stories vary. And you really, to get that crisp and get that right, I think is super important. And what that also does, I think, is it helps all of the parties, the advertiser and the vendor, understand why the nuances matter so much and when they have to come back. And so it's that accountability too that you're building in, and you're creating this mindset. But it's really difficult. It's about change management too, and it's constant, right? It never stops. It's a living, breathing thing, and you have to keep doing the due diligence and asking those reporters questions.
Yeah, one of the things, even with the scenario that you mentioned, marketers, they'll come and say, hey, we have this amazing new campaign, this amazing new tool. Oftentimes, kind of in my role, I'll find myself, I almost feel like a referee between the advertisers and the marketing teams that are really excited about a new technology or a new tactic, and the compliance teams and the privacy folks that are like, whoa, like let's slow down. And I think that oftentimes people forget that you're all working on the same team. You're all trying to work in that same direction. I guess from the compliance side of things, what are maybe some insights that you might be able to provide that advertisers could kind of bring to that discussion to bridge that gap a little bit?
I think at the end of the day, it's about the consumer. And I think that if you can remind everybody that this is about a great journey for them, and how are we going to make it really fun for the consumer, and how do we make sure that we are thinking about how the flow works so that it's easy, it's not overly complicated, so that our messaging is clear, and that we're protecting them. And so I often like to step out of this is about legal, and I really like to remind them that it's totally about our consumer. And is she going to be annoyed by seeing all these messages from us? Is she going to be frustrated by the volume of emails or receiving something when she's opted out? And so I think when you really turn it into something that's about that, it gets a lot easier. And it also makes the brands more willing and advertisers more willing to go back to partners and say, I don't really think you're the owner of the data. And I think that, this is how it should work, or to really get their buy-in. So,
yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it relates to that final point there around customer centricity. And that's really been a huge topic and really the goal for many organizations, especially in data practices here over the last several years. We often talk about customer centricity and having that 360-degree view of the consumer so that we can deliver the ideal experience across devices, across channels. We can deliver that personalized messaging, both in their interactions with our brand, as well as in targeting decisions and the ads that we're showing, so that everything is really relevant to them. With the end result being, if we deliver the best experience, then we're going to drive the most revenue and have the most really business success. I think one thing that's often been lost in that is we think about the consumer in kind of the center of all of our activities, but we forget that key component that you alluded to there, that we need to also be empathetic of their view. And that view now, they care so much, as everyone does, we are consumers as well, about that privacy piece. And we talked about it before with the just those changing consumer expectations. So embedding privacy as a part of that centricity, embedding that within those designs for the data operations, for our advertising operations, as well as the strategy, and really making privacy that brand proposition, making sure that we can ensure that consumer trust, have that really close relationship with the consumers, But it goes back to one of your points earlier. You have to walk the walk when doing that. It's not just a regulatory requirement, but if you're making that a brand proposition and you do not follow through with that, it has really serious kind of impacts on the organization and on that consumer relationship. So what are some ways that advertisers can ensure that they're doing that, placing privacy at really the center of that customer centricity and that brand proposition?
So the first thing is, I do think that the moment is really different with our consumers, and consumer centricity is such a value to us as our ethics as an organization. And so I think as we continue to put that at the center, it also means questioning the way that we do business and questioning some of the tactics that get proposed to us. And we are not afraid to walk away from things that sound too good to be true. And we can't be afraid to hold those vendors that choose not to play the way that we think they should play accountable. And so that may mean cutting them off. That may mean really rethinking their value in the ecosystem. And it may also mean, it's really kind of exciting for me to start hearing people questioning whether that 360 view, whether some of the things that have been done really do add value. And I think that a lot of promises have been made to advertisers about the value of certain opportunities. And I'm not sure that it's all there. And I think that is going to increase as everyone seeks to become a media platform and activate their 1P. And so I think it's just really important to continue to come back to that, Lucas, and really remember that privacy is not going anywhere.
Yeah, and we saw earlier from those timelines, it's only gaining steam, and it's really kind of picking up the pace, if nothing else. So one final question for you, as sitting on the privacy team, if you could request from the advertisers that within your organization, if they could do one thing to make the lives of the privacy and compliance folks easier, what would that one request of them be?
Start early. Talk to us early and think about privacy as part of this exciting new initiative that you want to kick off, because it's only going to happen in 2021 if we thought about privacy too. And, I think that if they remember that and we start that conversation, we can't go wrong.
Amazing. So the changes that are happening, obviously, as Sean mentioned in the first session, we're all in this together. Everyone's facing the same privacy-focused future, these same technical restrictions, these same regulatory requirements together. And at the end of the day, they're all in response to what our consumers want. So if we are putting our consumers at the center of all of our different practices and thinking about them and their wants and needs in that privacy context as well, it naturally makes sense just to do the common sense things that's best for those consumers and hold all of those vendors and everyone we're working with accountable as well. Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Cassidy, and I'll kick it back over to Pat.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassidy and Lucas. That was super informative, really good information. I'm starting to see a little trend. So Sean talked about his 3 truths. Lucas and Cassidy talked about 3 keys to success. So for the rest of the speakers, get your 3 points across. We want everything in points of 3. So again, thanks for that great presentation. We're going to take a 5-minute break and be back at 12:30. And please stick with us. See you in a little bit. Yeah, playing it. I'm loving it. So I think we've gone 2 for 2 in terms of awesome sessions so far. And I know we're about to go 3 for 3. So I'm really excited for this next session. We are joined by Lauren Denton from Google and Ariel Opelt from InfoTrust. Lauren is a sales engineering manager, and I think I actually heard the term durable from her about a year ago. So glad to have Lauren. And then Ariel is an audience specialist with InfoTrust, and they've both been doing a lot of work to help our customers really think about activation strategies for data in this privacy-centric world. So with that, Ariel, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Durability Summit, and thank you for joining our conversation on how to think about your activation strategy in 2021 and beyond. Today, we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to start with understanding how activation is being impacted by the privacy changes that we've already been talking about and hearing about this morning. Next, we're going to evaluate the current landscape and look at a couple durable activation tips. And then we'll close with 3 tips on how to get started. We wanted to keep with that trend of 3s. But before we jump in, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. So as Pat mentioned, my name is Ariel Opelt. I'm an audience specialist at InfoTrust. When I'm not helping clients with their activation strategies, you'll typically find me out hiking with my 2 dogs. And I'm joined today by Lauren from Google.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Denton. I run a sales engineering team at Google, and we focus on translating business objectives into technical and data solutions. Great. With that, I will kick things off with how impacted activation is by privacy. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to start with a bit of a metaphor here to give you an overview of how the activation landscape has changed in recent times. We're going to use the metaphor of 2 roads. Now, previously in digital marketing, we had different types of information that could be used to ensure that a relevant ad is shown to users. And that type of information could lead someone to completing an action on a website, any type of high value action like submitting a lead or purchasing a product. And those bits of information allowed marketers to take 2 different types of road to that final destination of purchase or high value action. First, the road of many, where marketers use information applied to groups of users to corral them into a bus of sorts to go along their journey. Or you could utilize the road of one-to-one, where marketers use information that was specific to an individual. Both routes offer relevance to their riders because when you are targeting on either road, including the road of many, the relevant ad experience is driven by the commonality that all users share. But as technology advanced, we didn't really have to think too much about which road that we used. We could track users with incredible accuracy across these paths and measure which strategies worked and really use them interchangeably. But if I take a step back and think about our ultimate goal, ultimately we want to create great customer experiences, regardless of where someone interacts with the brand. And we know that a great experience is one that is relevant or personal, thus personalization. The problem is that in many cases, the consumers were left out of the equation. They didn't understand how their data was being collected, how it was being used, and for what purposes. And if there was no direct connection between the consumer and the brand, they failed to feel the legitimacy of the connection, and trust eroded. What was meant to be personal ended up being the opposite. It felt disingenuous and somewhat unwelcome. But the rules of the road are changing, and in many ways are aiming to put the consumers back in the driver's seat of their information. And we've talked about these changes today, so I won't go in depth on each individually, but I did want to summarize the impact that they have on your activation strategies. First, there's been significant disruption in what type of consumer information can be accessed in various environments and inventory types due to the regulatory and technology changes. In many scenarios where user IDs like cookies or device IDs are the linkage to accessing the consumer information, there are going to be instances where that information can no longer be observed. Second, a direct connection with consumers is imperative. And for marketing activation, that direct consumer connection needs to be a two-way street. It's not enough to just have consented information from your consumers. In order to reach those consumers across the web, you must be able to securely match your consented, authenticated information with a publisher's consented, authenticated information in order to deliver one-to-one ad experiences. So at the end of the day, our traditional marketing strategies aren't gone or broken, but they are changing as marketers try to rise to the new expectations set by consumers and regulatory bodies. And it's likely that the change will keep coming. Even this week, Apple announced plans to crack down on fingerprinting by obscuring the IP address. Ignoring these changes means you're just building your activation strategy on sand. Without a strong foundation of durable strategies or strategies that can survive these privacy changes, you will be forced into a reactive mode, constantly patching different strategies as different privacy changes take effect. So, what does all that mean for your audience strategies of the future? Well, I'm happy to report that you can still utilize the road of one-to-one as well as the road of many to lead consumers down a journey. But with the new rules of the road governing them, how you use each might evolve. First-party data is imperative to unlocking the road of one-to-one or precision targeting. Without it, no gas. Yet, you might find that there's less scale available as publishers will need to have substantial, directly consented logged in data in order to deliver an ad to a precise user. Therefore, you may find more opportunity on the road of many. And by analyzing your customer data, you can discover insights on how to inform how to speak to those groups of users or cohorts in a relevant manner. These cohort strategies, guided by automation and machine learning, can leverage signals that apply to everyone and amplify your impact and reach. For the remainder of the session, we're going to dive a bit more in depth on some of these durable activation strategies for you to consider. Ariel, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Now that we have a bit of an understanding of how the privacy changes are going to impact, let's start looking at what the landscape for durable action actually looks like. So if you jump to the next slide, we're going to talk through a lot of what Lauren's already outlined. We're going to talk about core and contextual targeting. We'll talk about how to take advantage of that one-to-one with first-party lists and Google custom audiences. We'll also talk about automation and more of the machine learning side of everything. So let's start by jumping into core and contextual. Core and contextual isn't new for most marketers. In fact, many people are probably using this today, but it might not be your primary focus. Contextual advertising allows businesses to target specific groups of users without relying on third-party cookies. Contextual targeting can include things like keywords, language on the page, devices such as OTT, geolocation, and site categorization. Many ad platforms are expanding what's already available for some of the upcoming privacy changes. Advertisers should continue or start to look into contextual and core targeting, especially as privacy changes are rolling out. So all of this is taking it into account from the advertiser standpoint. But let's also look at this from the publisher side. If we jump to the next slide, we'll see that contextual targeting is also a way for publishers to amplify the first-party data and the website data for those advertisers on their site. Publishers can use key values to help define the content that's on the pages of their websites. Creating those well-defined key values makes your inventory attractive to advertisers. In addition, you can build a good ad unit hierarchy. If you look at the example, you see there's a sports page. Underneath that sports page, there's different types of sports. This allows your advertisers to get more targeted based on what the user is doing on site. And this is just one example of what a publisher can do with the contextual advertising that they already have. So now we've looked at contextual. Let's start looking at more of the first-party audiences. Lauren, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. The next two categories that I'm going to cover focus on how you can use your first-party data and audience strategies. And then Ariel will close us out with how you can amplify these efforts using first-party data with automation. So your first-party data has incredible power to drive marketing results. And the new paradigm that we're in requires marketers to think more expansively about the first-party data that you use. It's important to not only use first-party data to reach consumers directly, but also to inform the cohort and contextual strategies that you employ to prospect at scale. At Google, we have tools to do both. And I'll talk a little bit about the two tools that you see here. With 9 consumer apps and over 1 billion users each, Google has a foundation of transparent, authenticated information on users that can be used to deliver relevant ad experiences. You can even see and control the information, your own information at adsettings.google.com. And these two tools are foundational, and I recommend that you kind of think about how you can formulate your audience strategies around these in the short term. Now, the first is customer match, where you use first-party data to reach consumers directly, or precision targeting. If you're already using customer match, I urge you to explore new applications of customer match to achieve even more business goals, as it is a proven, durable solution. These new strategies could include doing more consumer insights or profiling, so hyper-segmentation to understand how different consumer attributes drive impact. Product testing, create digital focus groups to understand how a new product line is going to launch, or perhaps how a new web design page is going to fare. Predictive audiences are also a really interesting application. You can activate against propensity to purchase or predictive lifetime value models to drive cross-sell and upsell with your current customers. And you can even use targeting and precision targeting to support your first-party data strategy. So what if you were to drive people to a place in your website where the value exchange happens, and then be able to use that expenditure and marketing to become an investment in your data strategy? So there's a lot of non-traditional ways that you can think about using customer match. The second tool shown here is Google Audiences, which categorizes information that you see at adsettings.google.com into groups of users that are interested in something or in market for something. And using Google Analytics or Display and Video 360, you can see how your first-party audience or your site visitors overlap with Google Audiences and to inform more contextual and consumer-related insights. You can even create your custom Google Audiences, and in a bit, I'll go deeper on your customization options. But before I do that, I'm sure you're wondering, why these two recommendations for a durability summit? Which is a very good question. And so let's dive into why these strategies are actually durable. Starting first with customer match. Unlike traditional remarketing, customer match on Google Media inventory doesn't at all rely on cookies, first party or third party. Let me explain. After third party cookies are phased out, if I visited the website ilovekitties.com and the smart folks at I Love Kitties knew I was a high value customer and wanted to reach back out to me with a YouTube ad, there would be no way to find me across the universe of YouTube watchers. That's because ilovekitties.com assigned me a unique identifier or a first-party cookie, let's say 123, but that's not the same identifier that YouTube assigned me. They did their own ID assignment. Let's say I was ABC to them, and there's no translation of how 123s match up with ABCs. The translator was the third-party cookie. And without it, we aren't able to find the individuals who you want to remarket to. That's where Customer Match comes in. It allows you to take a list of authenticated customers with email addresses, phone numbers, or physical addresses, securely hash or obscure their personal information in an irreversible one-way manner, and then join it with Google's authenticated customer information to deliver relevant ad experiences to matched users. And Customer Match is not just durable. As I mentioned, it is a proven strategy. If you give me one more click, on average, Customer Match has 67% higher conversion rate than non-audience traffic and roughly a 20% higher performance than general remarketing. Now let's switch gears to Google Audiences. What makes Google Audiences a durable strategy that you should consider? Built using an array of different signals, Google Audiences are designed with robustness in mind. Our audiences continue to deliver in any environment by utilizing the best combination of signals available for that given scenario. In scenarios where user signals are available, such as perhaps being signed in on YouTube, Google Audiences can utilize the full array of data available. And in this scenario, we're able to much more efficiently predict the purchase intent and also directly observe their chosen ad settings and preferences. When user signals are not available because somebody has opted out or cookies have been constrained, the audience signals are not as clear. So we lean on our contextual signals and our broader machine learning systems in order to understand how to categorize that user. In the future, when third-party cookies are completely phased out, we are evaluating how to incorporate group signals from Privacy API proposal called Flock. And then we will also still apply our broader modeling systems to make intelligent predictions about the intent and the interest for that user. What's great is that the taxonomy and the workflow will largely stay the same with Google Audiences, even as the backend evolves. So the user signals that underpin them as those evolve. And so setting a smart strategy with Google Audiences today will pay off in the long term. Furthermore, Google Marketing Platform has tools available for both advertisers and publishers. So we also have the ability to utilize publisher first-party data to inform Google Audiences and Display and Video 360 programmatic guaranteed deals. This allows publishers to package up their first-party data, better monetize their site, while also helping advertisers ensure that they have the most comprehensive, privacy-first information to tailor their ad experiences on publisher websites. All right, I promised to go back into the customization. So before I pass to Ariel to talk about how to amplify these strategies with automation, let's review a couple ways that you can bring together these two durable assets, your first-party data and Google signals, to create that deeper customization. Depending on your objectives, you've got options to either refine your customer list based on Google signals or design a custom audience from scratch using what Google knows about users. I'll give you two quick examples of both. For option one, I Love Kitties is back at it again. They've got a new travel carrier that they'd like to promote, but they aren't sure which of their customers are planning to travel. With combined audiences, they can upload a list of high-value customers and combine it with a Google audience for in-market for travel, allowing them to address only those soon-to-be traveling kitty lovers. This can be a powerful way to refine your audience based on signals that might not be available in your database. But the travel carrier upsell isn't the only objective that I Love Kitties has. They also need to hit a growth target for new customers. And for that marketing objective, I Love Kitties could use keywords, URLs, apps for key kitty blogs, pet care websites, and any other relevant places that people look for all things kitty. That all of those websites and apps and keywords can be used to define your own custom audience. And this allows you to use Google's information to create segments that are specific to your business and your objectives. And again, since both options utilize durable assets, they are audiences that can be used today and into the future to create stability during an uncertain and ever-evolving time.
So Lauren touched a lot on automation, but we're going to expand that because it's such an important topic. Ad platforms typically have built-in machine learning models. You heard Lauren mention a couple of them for the Google platforms. One of the many use cases of those is expanding the reach. So Lauren went in depth on how that can happen and some of the examples for using just first-party data. Not only can it expand reach, as Lauren mentioned, it can also help with conversions. So not just brand reach, but also looking for other users who might be likely to convert, but don't necessarily know your brand today. In addition to machine learning on that side, you can also use machine learning for bidding. Smart bidding is just one example. Google platforms have a number of different smart bidding algorithms that can be used, but all of them have a core idea of making a decision at auction time based on previous signals that you have given them or they have in their databases. These are just two of the use cases for automation. And if you go to the next slide, we'll look at how to use your own first-party data as well. So many businesses already build predictive models. It could be customer lifetime value. It could be propensity to convert. It could be something else. These models give you an output, whether it's in a cloud database, in a Google Analytics, or you're sending it directly back to the ad platform. They're all tools that you can use to build custom audiences to segment and advertise to those users using the first-party methods that Lauren's already touched on. You can also use those signals for advanced bidding. The signals then help you target and bid to the customers who are most likely to convert, so they might have a high propensity score, or to customers who you believe have more value for your business, using that customer lifetime value. There's a number of different machine learning options, both built-in and things that you can use with your own first-party data. So we've covered a lot in this section, and we thought it'd be good to wrap it up with a use case to show you a company that's actually using a number of these techniques today.
So I wanted to close with giving you some insight on how Google is navigating these industry changes. And here are 4 principles that are top of mind for Google marketing team right now. They are relying more on their direct relationships that they have with their audience. That means their first-party data and really tapping into how they can derive insight as well as use it directly in activation. They're also using automation to fill the gaps when data is missing. And that means both on the activation side, using many of the automation strategies that Ariel just spoke of, but also on the measurement side to make sure they're filling the gaps when they're not able to observe different events across the web. They're also being flexible with how they deliver the most relevant ad to users and thinking about an array of different strategies. And then they're betting big on cloud technology for measurement and insights. And the last 2 we didn't talk too much about, so I'll give you an example through a Google Home mini case study. When running a campaign on The Guardian, the Google marketing team wanted to create a personalized or relevant experience, but in a privacy-safe way. They started with their first-party data and tried to understand how the product was used by consumers. And one thing that popped was the interest in cooking and the Google Minis help for the home cook when they are cooking at home. So they took that insight and they bought ads alongside recipes in the food section. And furthermore, they use machine learning and cloud technology to scan the page in real time to customize ads based on the recipe shown. And you can see some examples here like, hey Google, add ginger to my shopping list. So there are 2 key takeaways that stand out to me at this case study. So sorry, my actual Google Home is responding and trying to put it on my shopping list. So let me get back to the takeaways. 2 takeaways on the case study. The first is none of this requires third-party cookies to execute and is still incredibly relevant to consumers. Second, don't forget about the importance of creative. I think the old stat was that 30% of media performance was driven by targeting and strategy, and 70% was driven by creative. It's incredibly important that you don't forget to go the last mile and align the creative message with the interest of the audience. So now I'll pass it to Ariel, and she can show us how to get started on this journey.
Thank you, Lauren. I hope you have ginger on your grocery list now. So before we jump into the key takeaways, I want to start with a quote. So if you go ahead 1 slide. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's the act of yesterday's logic. This quote really resonated with me because as we look to these privacy changes, your tactics from yesterday might not work, and some of them might. So we have to be willing to adapt. We have to find ways to be durable and agile at the same time. So I think that's a good step to lead us into the takeaways. The first step is starting with an audit. We mentioned a business audit already. I believe there's a form floating around that we might be able to pass back to chat. But start with an audit. Look at your tech stack, see what's durable, figure out where you might need to make changes or where you might need to beef up and get more first-party data. The second one is get in the mindset of experimentation. Identify new goals, set up new approaches for testing. Just get in the mindset of trying new things, and it's okay to fail. And finally, be open to transformation. Things are going to change. Cookies are going away, yes, but as you can hear, everything isn't going away. A lot of the strategies we talked about today are things you can start doing now. That will set you up to be ready for that transformation in 12 or 18 months so that you don't have to be reactive at that point in time. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Lauren, for co-presenting. And I will pass it back over to Pat.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Lauren's Google Home device, special guest star. We were not expecting that, but good job all around. I really appreciate the fact that you didn't just stop at, hey, make use of your first party data. You actually went into tactics and strategy around that. I think that was very impactful. And then back to Sean's original point, performance is not at the odds of privacy. You can still drive performance in a privacy-centric world. Great job. Thank you both so much. We are going to take another break for a few minutes, and we're going to be joined by some folks talking about, I believe, GA4 next. So we'll see you all in a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, we're back. Thank you for sticking with us. So if you care about analytics, and I suspect you do, and if you use Google products, which I suspect you do, otherwise, why would you be on this webinar, this summit, then you probably heard about GA4 and the next in Google's analytics and enterprise platforms. We're going to be spending the next 30 minutes on this topic, and we'd like to welcome from Google measurement lead Isaac Abramowitz, from InfoTrust, Vice President of Client Services, Amin Shawki, and Industry Team Lead, Michelle Pliskin. Isaac, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Hey, everyone. I'm Isaac Abramowitz. I'm a measurement lead here at Google, and I focus on how our customers can effectively measure their investment with Google to drive their desired business outcomes. I'm extremely excited today to talk to you about Google Analytics. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And our primary goal for today is to give you a better understanding of our new property type in Google Analytics called GA4 properties, so you can get up and running in no time. So today we'll start by setting the landscape of the customer journey and where we're taking the Google Analytics product. Then we'll dive deeper into Google Analytics 4 properties, or I'll oftentimes refer to them as GA4 properties, followed by resources to get you started. So customer journeys are more complex than ever. Besides being multi-device, we now have multi-platforms. So apps, web, interactive TV, even the Google Assistant, which we saw with Lauren in the previous presentation, and multi-format as well: search, display, video, social. And really, essentially, the journey is multi-everything. Before this session, I was actually just thinking about it, about how I use Spotify. I use Spotify on many different platforms, whether it be the Google Assistant, or my computer, or my mobile device, or even when I'm playing games on my PS5. And really, we see at Google that our customers are demanding more from us than they can do with their current analytics setup. And we find that businesses that continue to improve their measurement perform better over time. BCG states that there's an incremental 16 percentage point of return for businesses who invest in measurement maturity. And also, Bain shows that businesses who do so are 4 times likely to achieve their goals. And with that, we really need to put the users first. User demands are rising more than ever, and they demand more privacy and transparency when it comes to measurement. And there's also regulatory changes in place as well. So when we think about Google Analytics, we're thinking a lot about first-party measurement and what we can do when third-party cookies are no longer around and these journeys are becoming more complex. Next slide. So that's why we're investing heavily in a new property type in Google Analytics, which we're calling Google Analytics 4 properties. It's a best-in-class measurement solution built for the future. We want to go to the 2 slides up. Next slide, please. So how did we get there? Well, Google Analytics has taken a long evolution dating back to 2005, when the product was acquired from Urchin and rebranded to Google Analytics in 2007. 2012 was a big milestone for Google Analytics. There was a large iteration where we launched what we called Universal Analytics. This brought a lot of new features, such as data import, measurement protocol, enhanced e-commerce. In addition, this launch brought Google Analytics to the app measurement space. Then in 2016, we launched Firebase Analytics, which was the next evolution of app measurement and really set the stage for event-based measurement, which we see in Google Analytics 4 properties. So if we fast forward to 2019, that is the launch of Google Analytics 4 properties. Now, GA4 properties is not necessarily the Google Analytics that you're used to from days past. GA4 properties is a new version of Google Analytics that combines the best of both worlds of what we have in Universal Analytics today, and also GA for Firebase for app measurement. It's the next evolution of GA for app and or web measurement. Don't be confused, because this is a product that is really for advertisers that have an app and or a website. And it introduces a lot of new and improved features with many more on the product roadmap. Now, GA4 properties brings 4 key benefits, and that's not a coincidence. It's scalable with your business. You're able to measure all the interactions of your customers, being able to understand exactly how they navigate not only between your app and your or your website, but also interactions such as impressions as well. It also introduces responsible, durable measurement. We've really thought through a lot on how we can build a product that's going to be sustainable for you to be able to use in the future. In addition, it also brings intelligent business insights. Me personally, I've been using Google Analytics for a long time. And if you've ever logged in, you've probably noticed that there are a lot of reports. It can sometimes even become overwhelming. And it's sometimes even like trying to find a needle in a haystack to get the insight that you really need. GA4 properties brings those to the forefront. And last but not least, GA4 properties drives business impact. With integrations with Google Ads and also integrations coming to our other GMP products later this year, you'll be able to drive impact to really be able to measure the overall impact of your media. So next I'll pass it off to Michelle, who will give you an overview of GA4 properties.
Cool. Thank you so much, Isaac. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. So let's talk about some pain points that you might have encountered in Universal Analytics and essentially how GA4 is going to address those. So the first one, basically like what Isaac was saying, you're able to have a unified event data collection model across your apps and your websites. So in the past, you might have had disjointed data sets. So your app was tagged one way, your websites were tagged another way. And when you try to look at your customer's experience holistically, you have to do a lot of connecting the dots. Now with GA4, you're going to be able to have that unified data collection strategy across all of your different experiences. So when you want to look at holistically, how is your customer behaving with your brand, you're able to do that in a much, much easier way. Also, you might have noticed that in order to really build out some data science capabilities, you would need to spend a little extra effort doing more excessive ETL. In order to activate your data and build really smart audiences for targeting. Now in GA4, you're going to have built-in very robust targeting with different integrations, and there are also different predictive analytics capabilities built right in that you can leverage. Finally, in Universal Analytics, maybe it took a little bit of time and manipulation to get different analyses that weren't necessarily in the UI to be able to get your performance monitoring that you wanted. Now in GA4, you're going to have the opportunity to have flexible yet structured reporting. So there are some out-of-the-box reports, but then there's a lot more emphasis on tools such as the Analysis Hub that really allow you to build whatever you want and to get the analysis that you really need based on your specific business goals. So next slide. So another thing that is really cool with GA4 is that we're changing to a user-based data collection approach. So in the Universal Analytics model, you essentially have your sessions that drive conversion being considered higher value, right? So if a user has 3 different sessions, so look at this example where they come to your website via a paid campaign, they set up their account, they go in and they favorite some items, but they don't convert. That session right now does not have any value. Then they come back via email, maybe they browse through some Q&As on different products, they favorite more items, but they don't convert, right? So that's just a second session that from an e-commerce standpoint, it would not have a conversion rate. If you're looking at different monetary targets for your business, right, that would not record any value. Then in the third time they come back to your session, maybe it's via a Google search, they go into their favorites, and then they end up purchasing. That session would be credited all of that value. Now, if we advance one slide, let's look at how GA4 compares to this. So now, rather than having all of your user interactions cut off essentially after each session, you now can see holistically what was your customer's entire journey that led to whatever conversion is applicable for your digital experience. So now that user, you can see how they have value for your company, but then also you can see the different steps in the customer experience that has led to that value. So this is a really, really big shift. And it's very, very exciting because you have the opportunity to truly understand all your different customer touch points, be it across different devices, across different sessions that are ultimately driving value for your business as well as your customer. Next slide. So some different potentially past pain points and some solutions that this GA4 user-based model is going to unlock for you. So in the past, right, transactional sessions, they're king, right? If we think back to that last slide, that third session is the one that has that monetary value. Now in GA4, all engagements matter. Whether or not you converted in session 1 or session 3, you're going to be able to see how each of those really drove impact. Also right now, calculating lifetime value is a bit manual, right? You have to look at the right data across sessions. It can be a little bit overwhelming. With GA4, there will be predictive lifetime value built right into the UI. So you don't need to do manual data manipulation. You're going to be able to have that at your fingertips. And then finally, this is something that has come up throughout the session, and I'm sure that you think about very regularly. Cleared cookies, they lead to data loss, less insight into your customers, right? Like we really depend on the cookies to understand how our customers behaving across experiences and on your website. Now in GA4, there's something called consent mode. It's in beta right now, but Google's working to provide modeled conversion data to fill this gap that's raised by these privacy changes. So this is a really great way to add that durability into your data, and it's going to be available through the use of GA4. So you're going to see a lot of these successes really pull through in your data. You don't necessarily need a data science team to get really smart, and you can understand your data or your user experience in a more holistic way. Next slide. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Amin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. And hello, everyone. This is Amin from InfoTrust. What I want to talk about to kind of close out the session today on GA4 are some of the durable features within Google Analytics 4. I'm actually going to build on consent mode that Michelle just touched on, but I want to start with Google Signals first and cross-device measurement that is baked into GA4. For those that know Google Analytics currently, the Universal Analytics property type, Google Signals is available today that you can activate, but it's going to be built into GA4 by default. And essentially what it is, it allows your reporting to be leveraging a lot of the rich Google data for signed-in users on their platform so that you can see things like cross-device behavior, even if consumers coming to your platforms aren't logging into your particular platforms, but they're known by Google through their deterministic model. This is going to be baked into all the reports within GA4, and it's really, really powerful. It's very relevant to some of the information that Lauren earlier mentioned with the Google audiences and how that can power a lot of your analysis and insights. So wanted to really touch on that feature as a durable piece of GA4 and why it's really the future for Google Analytics, and something that we're really excited to have across all the reports versus just a subset of the reports and capabilities with the current version of Google Analytics. But what we're really excited about, next slide, is GA4 consent mode that Michelle teed up for me. And I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about what it is, how it works, and maybe how you can get started. So next slide. Pain point that Michelle mentioned around potentially loss or less insight into your consumers through cleared cookies or non-consenting users, and how GA4 and consent mode can allow you to see more from that gap of those users that might not have consented and that you didn't capture very much or any information about them. I really like the visual here to simplify what it's doing or how consent mode actually works. And I do want to note that it doesn't replace your consent management platform or processes. It augments and supports it specifically for Google Tech and Google tagging, such as GA4. But essentially, when users are coming to your websites, may or may not be consenting, and then you have conversions captured, what consent mode allows you to do is, based on the consent provided by the consumers, by your users, augment how the Google tags actually are deployed so that for those that have consented fully, your tagging works and you can see all the data around those because they've consented to provide that information. But those that declined or don't want their cookies or their information to be used, Google will use their modeling and powerful capabilities to show you some of that information. So instead of a complete gap in your data and your reporting, you'll have some model data to support and further analyze kind of how to improve your performance. So one thing that we've seen with a lot of our customers over the last couple of years when deploying a consent management platform for those non-consenting users is just a big drop in data collection within Google Analytics. This consent mode feature allows you to see some of that information in a privacy-centric way because you're not seeing specifics about individuals that didn't consent, but just modeled behavior. So again, goes back to that saying from the keynote earlier today, performance doesn't have to be at odds with privacy. There are technologies and solutions and ways to look at your data and still make strategic insights with changes coming to the platform, such as GA4 and consent mode. Next slide will show a little bit more laid out how it actually works. So if you're interested in looking more, there's support articles online, and you can reach out to us, of course, to talk through that, or Google. But this is a one-slide summary here that explains kind of what I mentioned there, where when users come to your site, they still have to indicate consent status. This is not a workaround. This does not ignore their consent preferences or anything like that. It uses that to dictate how the Google tags will actually utilize cookies or be deployed. And based on that consent decision, the tags will fire or adjust their behavior so that for those that don't consent or you don't have full visibility, like as if they were consenting, modeling then kicks in and you can still be data-driven with your data. This right now is available with GA4. It's also possible with other Google Tech and tagging. Like I mentioned, it's available today. The beta that is being launched or in process right now is on the modeling side. But essentially, that's how consent mode works today. Next slide. One thing that we wanted to share as well, and this is a little bit of a snuck it in depending on the time there, is just how GA4 is also providing added metrics and capabilities that current versions of Google Analytics and other measurement platforms might not have. But by using GA4, you not only have access to the consent mode modeling, but other type of modeling metrics and predictive metrics baked right into the reporting suite. I wanted to show this here because as we're thinking about what are some durable tactics for measurement and how can we change how we're looking at analysis and such, baked right into the tool are some of these metrics that will be available to you, such as churn probability, probability to convert. A lot of these anomaly detection, such as this report shows, these are useful because before GA4, a lot of this would have to be done with your data science team or outside GA and could be time intensive, as Michelle mentioned. Now it's being more easily accessible, surfaced right in the reporting as you're using GA4 itself. Next slide. So to somewhat summarize the section here, because when we talk about GA4 and all these capabilities and how they can help you be more durable in the future, we often get asked like, well, how do I start? You know, we've invested so much time and energy and rely on our current reporting and measurement. So what are the steps to actually get up and running and adopt GA4 for your business? We like to break it out in this model here of crawl, walk, run. Essentially, look at what are the things we should be doing now and continue to progress our analytics maturity so that we can make GA4 our single source of truth and leverage all those amazing capabilities. So I'm not going to go in detail through each one of these steps, but this is an outline of if you're thinking or just getting started with GA4, you don't need to completely scrap, and we don't recommend completely eliminating your current measurement solutions, or if you're using the current GA, Universal Analytics. Dual tag, have it side by side your current measurement platform, roll it out iteratively that works for your business. What we recommend is configuring GA4 for a few websites, maybe for your mobile applications, especially if they're using Firebase Analytics, because that powers the GA4 for the mobile app side. Deploy that, test and learn, use consent mode, try the consent mode beta, build out your mapping for your full deployment to understand or collect all the key events and attributes and things that you need and have with your current measurement platform so that through the remainder of this year and into next year, you have historical data and it can become your single source of truth from an analytics perspective and to power all of your analysis and audience building capabilities as well. So wanted to at least provide some specific actions that can be taken to adopt GA4 versus just kind of an overview of the features. And next slide, if you're looking for any more resources about what else GA4 can do, how do you get started, how do you both tag but also rebuild reporting and insights, we have a resource hub on our website. I just did a webinar yesterday with a colleague about how to rebuild your reporting and dashboards. All of these are available for you to look and plan accordingly with your business, and always happy to help further. But wanted to touch on those few durable features that we're excited about with GA4 and how to address it, measurement in the future. So with that, I will pass it back to Pat, I believe.
Great. Thanks, Amin. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Isaac. Do you guys have a couple quick questions if you have the appetite for it? So I did want to follow up on one of the comments about data science and not needing data scientists anymore. The next session, we have some data scientists. They're going to be really angry if I don't ask this question. But how do you best orchestrate the data science and ML that comes with GA4 with an existing data science program and some of the resources you have there? Any thoughts on that?
Maybe I should take this first attempt. Just for all the data scientists out there, including at InfoTrust, I am not suggesting GA4 replaces the need for more robust data science and activities there. What I want to touch on is that GA4 allows the entry point for data science capabilities and those advanced metrics to be a lot easier or lower entry points, if you will. It's a lot easier to get started with some of that advanced analysis, advanced capabilities. However, it's still, GA4 is still a platform built for all. For your specific business and how you want to analyze or drive improvement and build robust targeting strategies, et cetera, there's still a lot of value to take that next step with advanced data science capabilities with your business. I like to look at it in the crawl, walk, run model. GA4 provides you a way to get into some of those advanced capabilities in the crawl stage, where previous technologies, you can only be in the run stage or more advanced to utilize some of those advanced metrics. Now, it's a little bit easier to get started, maybe get buy-in within your organization to then scale and build out a data science function or work with a partner or what have you. So I don't think it replaces it, to be clear. I think it only complements and provides more visibility on the value of driving advanced analytics. Michelle, Isaac, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think if you are also a one-person show and you don't necessarily have all of these resources at your fingertips, to Amin's point, you can still get up and running and then justify the need to do more of that work, right? Because you see success with some of these things that are available in the platform. So I really like that terminology of it's a very nice complement and a really good just entry point to start getting smarter.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good segue for our next session. And I think that does get you guys out of the hot water you were in. So good job. Thanks so much. We are going to take about a 10-minute break now, seventh inning stretch. So we'll be back about 1:40, and we're in the home stretch. So stick with us. And thanks again, Michelle, Isaac, and Amin. Okay, we're back. It's 1:40 on the nose, and for our second to last session, it's called Living in a Post-Third-Party World, What Data You Should Be Collecting Now and What You Can Be Doing with It. So that's a mouthful. I'd like to welcome from Google Marketing Science Team Lead Maritsa Toro, and from InfoTrust Lead Data Scientist Pam Castricone. I probably said that wrong, sorry Pam, and Lead Analytics Engineer Tyler Blatt. Pam, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Pat. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Like Pat said, my name is Pam Castricone, and I'm the Data Science Team Lead at InfoTrust. In today's session, we'll be hearing from two experts on the future of marketing without third-party data. Specifically, what you can start doing now with your data to ease the transition to a post-third-party data world. Our goal is that whatever your own industry, you'll come away with something new, a new idea, strategy, or a fresh perspective that you can apply to help your organization successfully navigate the changing privacy landscape. Here's the format that we'll be following for today's session. We'll begin by meeting our panelists, and then I'll kick off the conversation by asking questions that touch on some of the high-level themes and trends that we should be thinking about. If you have questions for our panelists, feel free to submit them to the chat, and we'll answer them at the end if we have time. Now, to introduce the panel, we're joined by Maritsa Toro, Marketing Science Lead at Google, and Tyler Blatt, Certified Cloud Architect at InfoTrust. Welcome. So to kick things off, Maritsa, Tyler, do you mind telling us a little bit about your current role? Maritsa, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Pam. So the marketing science team at Google is really a blend of data analysts, data scientists, and data engineers. And the reason why we brand ourselves as marketing science is because we're using that skill set to be hyper-focused on driving marketing outcomes. And so what we're really focusing on now is prototyping analytical solutions using Google Marketing Platform and Cloud. And these solutions can span, designing an analytical framework for adopting a new feature to designing a machine learning model. And right now we're investing a lot of time, especially in aggregate level modeling, I would say.
Awesome. Tyler, can you tell us a little bit about your role?
Yeah. So my name's Tyler Blatt. I'm an analytics engineer and cloud architect at InfoTrust. What that means is essentially everything engineering that goes along with analytics. So with my history at InfoTrust, I've done everything from front-end tagging, TMS systems, data layers, into building out data lakes, data warehouses, data marts, doing the ETL that leads into visualization and even some ETL and data preparation that goes before Pam's wonderful data science team takes over. So we work with all parts of data throughout their journey, and I'll be touching on the data points throughout today.
Great. Well, let's kick things off with a question about analytics data. To echo some of the previous speakers, changes in privacy regulations are giving users more control over how their data is used. How does this change how you view first-party data? Tyler, let's start with you.
So to get things started, the only thing that is certain about the future of digital analytics is that it remains uncertain. It's definitely a volatile place right now. The death of the third-party cookies in combination with privacy regulations have thrown analytics and marketing data into a flux, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the problem. However, it's one great starting point, and as we've heard in a couple things today, for this cookieless world is a strong first-party data set, and from our last session, we know that's handled really well with GA4. It does this very well. So to talk about GA4 a little bit from a different angle, you can think about each data point in GA4 as a piece of behavioral data with metadata data tied to it. So some kind of site interaction, and then there's just extra data tied onto that. So for example, when a user consents, that metadata might contain identifiable information like user ID. But in the case of no consent, you simply have collected an anonymous behavioral data set. GA4 does this really elegantly with consent mode, which is currently in beta. This less rigid style of data collection allows you to be more agile with the logic that that we apply to our analytical data sets. That's kind of going to be one of my themes today, is being agile in this space is really important. So what do I mean by the agile nature of the event-based analytics model? Essentially, when you look at universal analytics or classic analytics before it and the trends, everything was about defining something. What's a page view? What's a transaction? What are UTMs? What are you have all these definitions, but when we go to the core of what analytics really is, it's some set of information like I defined, and then some interaction with the site. And when you organize it in that event-based model, it allows you to be a little more loose with what we consider. So let's build this really strong first-party data set with all that we can legally collect now from a great relationship with the customer. And then we can apply analytics as we choose as we go forward. So that's why it kind of allows us to be a little bit more agile in the space, and we're not at the whim of those kind of definitions. So the question, to get back to where we started, was how does this change your view of first-party data? So at first glance, the concept of personalized targeted data like going away or having less personalized targeted data due to the lack of consent seems alarming, but I view it personally as a way to look at analytics differently. that we can just look at it differently. I've heard this a few times today. Performance is not at odds with privacy. I think it's a central theme, and it hits the nail on the head. So the way that I'm looking at analytical data sets is, on one hand, you have this massive behavioral data set that encompasses all your users and all the engagements. And then within that set, that large behavioral data set, there's a subset of consented users who have an open relationship with your brand and therefore are valuable marketing assets. These two data sets face different challenges, especially as browser changes are coming into effect and legislation and such. So it's important to understand these two classifications of different data sets and how we can effectively advertise to them.
Great. Maritsa, what about for you? How does this change your view of first-party data?
Sure. So I would say, as Tyler notes, like, there are many unknowns around the future state of activation and measurement in the digital ecosystem with all of the changes that are happening. So I would say the good news, and for those who were able to attend the keynote, Sean mentioned that large-scale testing is not a technical thing, right? It's a cultural thing. So just like we try new things in our personal life, like maybe, you know, completing a new hill with a steeper incline for my runners out there, successful organizations will continue to try new things, and they'll continue to build and really develop that culture of experimentation. So what is a culture of experimentation? Obviously, there's more than one aspect to a culture of experimentation, but for me, I would say a key aspect is really having an everything is a test mentality. And that way of thinking can really help transform your business. One reason it can help transform your business, I believe, according to Google's estimate, that at least 96% of experts' expected outcomes are proven wrong, right? So experimentation and testing controls that risk of 96% of what you expect being wrong and can really put you on a track to identify where there's opportunity. But I think it's really important to set expectations with testing, that not all tests are going to yield positive results. I know recently Microsoft shared that about a third of their tests yield negative results, a third yield neutral results, and honestly, only a third of their tests yield positive results. This is really important to foster throughout your organization when using first-party data, but even more broadly to promote innovation. So I would say personally, I was very lucky to start my career in data science with this philosophy, because when I was in graduate school, I saw departments that did not allow research studies that had negative results to kind of be approved by their degree completion. My department didn't think that way, and it really helped me adopt that thinking where all findings are valuable, even negative ones, because it helps you reinvest your future efforts on higher impact areas. So again, I would say during this unique time where we still have third-party cookies, we should be testing wherever possible. Yes, with your first-party data and automation, but I would say test more holistically with cookieless approaches for activation, such as contextual, and extend your testing into measurement as well. So evaluate your attribution performance based off of a traditional MTA with an aggregate data approach, maybe a regression-based digital attribution. So again, I know we were talking about first-party data, test with first-party data, but just keep testing wherever you can.
Awesome. So I think what I'm hearing from the two of you is that there are two mindset shifts that are actually underway right now. As Maritsa described, we need to adopt a culture of testing that goes beyond just site optimizations. And from Tyler, thinking about analytics data as actually being two data sets, all users, and then that subset of users who have actually consented. So let's talk for a moment about that data set of all users. How should we be thinking about advertising for those users who have not given consent? Tyler, let's start with you.
I'll jump in on this one. So without consent, what do we lose here? We lose those one-to-one personalized targeted ads that everyone's used to. And that's really like That's been the MO for a few years. Everyone's about like, we got to get this data, we got to get it attributed, we have to get their IDs, we got to target back out to them. So where everyone's sort of freaking out, but advertising without one-to-one personalization is not a new concept. This was the world for a very long time, but it's kind of fallen behind in recent years because the effectiveness of those one-to-one ads is very good, so that it's become the focus. But as we return, what's old is new again, and we're returning to some old concepts. So, for example, contextual advertising does not require any consent to be effective. I mean, we've heard this a little bit earlier today when we were talking about activation and the different strategies that we had presented today. But to give an idea, creating an effective measurement plan for your contextual advertising would be key to transitioning into this new marketing ecosystem. Like measuring traffic-driven metrics like click-through rates or cost per click are great, but using analytics to measure campaign conversion metrics to help inform buying decisions is even better. And then while thinking of it differently, right? So while a campaign might not be driving purchases, this contextual campaign might lead to user sign-ins, which allows you to engage that customer in remarketing because now they've consented and engaged with your brand. So make sure you have an effective measurement strategy for these different types of cookieless attributions and cookieless advertising, so you can understand the role all these channels are playing and what value it's bringing, so then you can analyze and improve that system as a whole. Measuring this correctly helps us understand what content's driving us to a better relationship with the customer, and that's really the ultimate goal, right? One other thing to talk about, one thing that I've been thinking on quite a bit, and this is 100% in the vein of Maritsa's culture of testing, is what's the proper way to approach future marketing techniques or past marketing techniques that are coming back, while we're currently have these like large returns from personalized ads while we still can, like we can predict with a reasonable bit of certainty that targeting is going to shrink when third-party cookies are removed, or at least that personalized one-to-one targeting, right? Maybe not targeting as a whole. And if a company right now is seeing large returns from these ads, they'll be the most vulnerable for losing those large returns. But also, if they cut the money while they can get it now, they're losing out on potential money testing a solution. So how do you embrace that culture of testing? How do you you want to go into this new world with some sense of certainty without losing out on too much? And that's an interesting problem to think about in the current landscape.
Absolutely. Maritsa, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I know we've been talking and a lot, and the industry has been talking a lot about the expectation that segments of targeted users will begin to shift in size. And that's a expectation that makes sense, and we're probably already seeing that in some places. But let's also consider the case where an advertiser has limitations, maybe on like the % of sales tracked at the one-to-one level. Perhaps because sales are occurring through a distributor. Think of a Pixel phone being sold by Best Buy, right? So I would say one interesting use case we've been testing with is really leveraging aggregate website behavioral signals. And Tyler was talking a lot about the behavioral signals and their value. So how do we use aggregated website behavioral signals to understand significant drivers of sales? So one testing example that we've done very recently is we took total daily unit sales as a proxy to individual sales, right? Breaking that one-to-one level for the activation. And we joined those total daily unit sales with total event completions. And right now we were using Google Analytics 360, still learning before going into GA4. And so a total event completion, an example could be the total number of video views with more than 50% view through. Or it could be total visits to find a location page if you're a retailer. And so we identified the top 3 positive behavioral signals to test in what we're saying, or how we would explain an advanced first-party bidding strategy. And so if you're already using auto bidding based on like a floodlight activity, that could perhaps be your control cell. And then you can design a custom bidding test cell with something even as simple as taking those 3 signals and giving them equal weighting and learn from there. And so doing these customized bidding strategies, early results have shown really strong performance, and we're really excited to continue and test and learn around this strategy. but not only because smart bidding is a durable activation approach for the future, but also Isaac had mentioned in the last session around a strategy for testing GA4. As I mentioned, this specific use case, we were still in Google Analytics 360, but it's a good strategy to start doing your dual tagging and getting ready for the GA4 event-based level data that will be where we're moving towards in the future.
Awesome. One other point I'd like to make on that before we move on, just thinking about the system as a whole, this doesn't necessarily have to do with advertising as much, but essentially, when we're looking at this group of non-consented users, what that actually is I talked earlier about segmenting the data, and you have that's one subset, and the other subset would be consented users. And one thing that I think people need to be thinking about is analyzing those sets for behavior of what's potentially driving consent, what's potentially driving logins, what's potentially causing that to not happen. Are there traps on your website that are keeping people from logging in? Are there things stopping people from engaging? And those subsets are worth looking in. So in the spirit of testing everything, not just first party, but and even this could be considered that, but let's run a multivariate optimized test to find out, could different language drive consent? Could we have a better customer engagement if we altered that language? Can I work with my legal teams to get 5 copies of what this looks like and then potentially have different opt-ins and see if we can drive more users? Can I figure out ways to drive more users to log in and engage with my brand? And the closing on that thought, in my opinion, privacy regulations are just a great catalyst for improving customer relationships. This is something that should have been happening to begin with, but now it's just a catalyst. And if we look at analytics as an opportunity in this space, it's a great mindset to move forward and just really engage with customers better.
So building on that, and your ideas, Tyler, about optimizing getting users to consent, let's talk about them. What are you seeing in terms of one-to-one personalized advertising for those users who have given their consent?
Yeah, so the death of the third-party cookie meant the death of cookie match tables. This means personalized ads are going to change as we know them, right? And if you're not sure what a cookie match table is doing, you're not alone. A lot of people have no idea what's going on with third-party cookies, so you're right there with them. Essentially, what they allowed advertisers to do was match customers' advertising IDs. It's a little bit about Lauren was talking about in the activation phase on how that doesn't work anymore. They allowed it to attach different IDs so that you could advertise in different places. And without third-party cookies, that's a big difference. Third-party cookies, that system is largely broken. So with match tables being like one of the main activators on how that entire ecosystem was working, the industry's kind of scrambling to figure out how we going to activate users. What are we going to do for activation, and what does personalization or targeted one-to-one personalization look like, right? One thing, and we've heard about this today, so I won't go too far into this, that people are trying, and this is an example of the industry adapting. This is not something that's existed, but something that is sort of new and a new take on this, is the flock and fledge proposals, which are using cohorts as an alternative to the cookie-based targeting system. It allows users to be placed in groups. This allows the user to remain basically anonymous in this, while the advertisers can target based off the cohort as a whole, and then those can be improved. So that's an interesting one. One of the more popular ones is kind of growing at the moment, alternate IDs, which is a less new style of targeting. So an alternate ID is essentially a way of looking up who is this user to you based off of some PII information. So you can take from another one of the previous sections today, Google's customer match works when you want to you have your offline customer data, you don't know how to advertise to them. Maybe they logged in at the store and they signed up for an email list, but I don't know who they are to reach out to them on the web. So the way that customer match essentially works is for users who have opted in for this to be, they've consented from the Google side. You essentially can reach out to any logged in Google person on their Google accounts to activate them on YouTube and places like this and start showing them ads. Now, this is a little bit of a step away from customer match, but it's a similar style of technique you're seeing with companies like LiveRamp, and they're doing the same thing, but it's not specific to the Google ecosystem. This gets a little more invasive, and the jury's still out on what this is. So LiveRamp themselves have this map of customer information that looks very similar to cookie match tables. So you can still activate on all these different platforms. And you're essentially looking up the same way with PII information. But like I said, I would say the jury's still out on if that's as invasive as third-party cookies, and if going that avenue might hold a little bit more risk, because if that's then seen as the next problem, they could be acts like third-party cookies. So take that with a grain of salt when going through those options. And then the last one that I'll touch on today, which there are a few more, but in the sake of brevity, a lot of companies are starting to build their own CDPs. So if that customer comes with their ad ID from some pixel or something on your website, there's no reason that you can't store it yourself. So you can think of this in the way that a lot with Google Analytics, we store client ID as a use of activation in a lot of GMP places. Essentially, build your own first-party data set. That's been a huge piece today that I've talked about. The one piece that's really interesting when I think about building out your own CDP is the need for building your own CDP is coming at the time that server-side tag management's taken off. So all this data is flowing through your cloud. Just drop it off while it's on its way. It's coming through, and it's right there. So that's a lot to digest. There's a lot of different things moving, and which one do I pick? What do I do? It goes back to what I'm talking about. Let's be agile. Let's understand that we can move in this industry, and we've collected the right first-party data so that we can act on all of these options, and then we can test them. Let's go back to testing. We want to be able to try lots of different things. We want to be able to test, and then even be agile in our responses to those tests. So in all for that section, lots of options, but just be ready to try things out.
Awesome. So I think an interesting call out here in our discussion is that the changes Safari has already made as part of ITP, that with those changes, it's been possible to see some of the impact already. And so a question to you, Maritsa, can you tell us about your experience with clients you've worked with who've already seen the impact of ITP?
Yes, so true, Pam. Brands have seen impact already, and we've actually been really inspired by the culture of experimentation of these brands, who we would say are early adopters of that mantra, performance is not at odds with privacy. And so these early adopters, I would say, were significantly impacted by ITP. And so what does significantly impacted mean? I would say a large share of their website traffic was coming from Safari, upwards of 50%. And so they began testing in 2018. And that's why we're saying they're early adopters. And it's a good example of Tyler, reminding us that we need to be agile, because a privacy journey really needs to involve testing multiple activation and measurement strategies, not just one approach. And so let me share an example of a privacy journey based on some of the early adopters. So Tyler mentioned this, for activation, wherever possible, grow your relationship with the customer. Invest in your direct-to-customer data capture. It's going to grow the value of your first-party data, and it's very, very important. In the example I gave earlier, a lot of these early adopters are already using first-party data signals to inform their bidding strategies. They're also, though, using audience expansion. And so why are they using audience expansion? To help test the shift of remarketing budgets to prospecting budgets and seeing how that performance compares. And so around audience expansion, there's so many testing options. And that's with first-party data or without first-party data. But let's talk about, one big area where testing, can be agile is around that composition of your seed list. And so in the case of using first-party data, let's say you build a propensity model. And so you want to analyze those model scores, and those model scores are going to tell you how likely a user is to complete a conversion event of interest, whatever conversion event that's relevant to your business. And so you take those model scores and you're going to rank order the users, and you can create groups. Let's say you create typically 10 ordered groups, with group 1 having the highest scored users. So one example of testing is, why don't I take the top 30%, groups 1, 2, and 3, and see how that seed list performs when you add on audience expansion. Or you can test using the top 50%, and then different levels of, again, audience expansion. But as data scientists, we know every model makes prediction errors, and these errors typically start to increase after the top 30%. So what's really interesting is I've seen better performance taking, let's say, everyone in the top 3 groups, then becoming much more surgical and only taking X number, like maybe the first 1,000 users scored in group 4, not all users in group 4, then take the first 1,000 users scored in group 5, not all users in group 5, and kind of create this composite seed list to then do your audience expansion. So interestingly enough, this idea came from a marketing partner. I was jealous. I did not come up with this idea. They had expertise in break-even analysis with direct mail. So they leveraged that, strategic learning and brought it over into the digital ecosystem. I thought it was brilliant. Again, just a reminder, everything is a test. Pam, I think, did we want to kind of, with timing, pivot? Sorry to ask.
Yes, let's just pivot to closing thoughts since we have about 4 minutes left. Can you share with us what are your recommendations for things organizations can start doing now? Tyler, let's start with you.
Yeah, so in the sense of brevity, I won't go too long on all of these, but essentially, set yourself up for success with a first-party data set. If you've been listening to today, you've heard that 100 times. It's what you got to do. It's one of the most important things. Systems like GA4, handling consent for you, natural export to BigQuery, you own the data set once it's in BigQuery. These are just really strong. So start looking at it that way and learning to see your data for what it is. Consent is an opportunity to improve customer engagement. Viewing and consuming the data in the segments that they are. So consented users, all users and behavioral, non-consented users. What is the purpose and what can I learn from these data sets and their communication with each other? It's really important to know what your data is telling you. Embrace an agile development cycle and react to the market. So you need to be quick and moving and react to what's going on. Let's cast a wide net. Something that Sean said this morning that's just so true in the keynote. Don't be afraid to fail. Okay, like we got to try these things out. We got to be able to test and know. I would much rather, this is my quote, so I'm not putting words in Sean's mouth. I would much rather fail than never find the right answer. I want to find the right thing that's for me. I want to test things and find out the solution we should be doing. And it's okay to try things out. Not every test is going to be perfect, but as long as we're embracing this culture of constantly improving, we know that we're going to be successful. Those are my takeaways.
Awesome. And final thoughts from you, Maritsa.
Sure. And Tyler, I love that. Much rather fail and truth seek to find the right answer. I would say, we've been talking about user level data. We've relied on it for a long time, but there's no need to panic. I know, Tyler, you shared some, tactical steps we can take right now. So I would like to close with a story. I'll make it quick. It's not a personal story, but it's a story told in the movie Hidden Figures. If you've not yet seen the movie, I highly recommend it. So Hidden Figures not only highlights the contributions of Black female mathematicians to the US and NASA, there are actually a lot of other learnings there as well that are relevant for this moment in digital advertising. So Katherine Johnson, who's played by Taraji Henson in the movie, helped solve the measurement challenge of trajectory and landing for the very first human spaceflight. Again, the very first human spaceflight. So this means at the kickoff of that mission, the team had no idea how to determine the landing coordinates. This means there was no existing measurement strategy. So did this deter the US from continuing in the space race and doing something new, seeking that truth, Tyler? Absolutely not. Katherine identified that Euler's method, and we won't geek out on the math here, but it is a mathematical theorem that originated in 1768, first published. So to Tyler's point, everything old can still be new. And so using that theorem, they were able to determine the coordinates, and we had a successful first human space flight. We built out the space program, and I think it's just a very inspirational story that again highlights without prior technical expertise, we can still learn hard things. And most importantly, the math is there to solve any problem. So again, let's not panic.
All right, well, thank you so much to Tyler and Maritsa for that insightful and lively panel. And so I think the two takeaways from our session, test and don't panic. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Maritsa. That was awesome. You guys shared so much relevant and actionable information. That was great. Somehow you made me smarter yet feel so dumb at the same time. So well done there. Before our last break, in the chat box, you're going to see a form. If you've been with us the whole way, this is your chance now to register again for the chance to win the Peloton. So please go ahead and fill that out. And we'll be back in about 5 minutes at 2:15 for closing remarks. And then we'll do the Peloton drawing a little bit after that. So be right back. thanks everyone for sticking with us through a long day, but a great day so far. So for our closing remarks, I'd like to welcome Jeremy Woodlee from Google, who's the Director of Marketing Platforms, and from InfoTrust, rejoining us again is Michael Loban, our Chief Growth Officer. Michael and Jeremy, over the past 3+ hours, we've had an incredible amount of content and thought leadership. I'm not sure how you're going to be able to distill it all and summarize it in 30 minutes, but best of luck with that. So Michael, bring us home.
Thank you so much, Pat. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello. Nice to see everybody. Well, see you and be in front of everybody else.
Pat, maybe I can distill it in one quote from Ray Bradbury. Life is trying things to see if they work. That probably accounts for a lot of things that we've discussed today. Starting with Sean's keynote, performance is not at odds with privacy, and we have to think consumers first, thinking long-term, and culture of experimentation. Jeremy, what stood out to you? What are some of your takeaways from this day?
Well, I've been with Sean on this journey for quite a long time. I've worked for him for 8 years, and he's been a real leader within Google on these kind of topics. And so I just want to reiterate what he's saying, to be honest with you, that it does take a spirit of adventure right now to be able to take the steps down this path. But there's a lot of rewards on that path to taking control over your own first-party data, having better connections with consumers, and being able to extract value from those relationships with your marketing. There's a lot of benefits for looking into the future and being able to future-proof yourself for big industry changes, and fundamentally put the consumer at the center of your business and listen to them and have a relationship with them that's valuable to them and respects their desires to have privacy controls. I think it is it can be a little scary, but I do think there is an interesting positive spin to all this, where we end up in a better place with our relationships with consumers and have better control over our marketing, more so than we had in the past. So, I just encourage everybody, it's just a process. We have to start taking steps down the path and start making progress toward that future.
Oh, fantastic. And I think just you mentioned that Tyler mentioned it in the previous session, really the idea that there's got to be so much optimism in this. I think it's very easy with all of these changes happening to start getting negative. There are so much unknowns. How will I get out of this? But yeah, there's so much optimism. Look at so much innovation that is happening in this space right now, like never before.
Yeah, the way you start the story is often a very negative story, right? Like change is coming, Apple's doing this, Google's doing that. I've got to, worry about digital privacy regulations, things like that. But I think ultimately there's a much better positive story for most companies and brands, that there is an opportunity to put the consumer at the middle of their story, of their business, and to build a good relationship with them, develop more first-party data experiences and connections, be able to mine those for better marketing and better outcomes you care about fundamentally. There's just a lot of opportunity in this journey that puts us in a direction I think is more fundamentally good for everybody. And I'll give you a real concrete example. I think when you're thinking about media mix and how to allocate your media spend to different channels, like MMMs have been around for a long time, but they've been run on an annual basis or a semi-annual basis, and use model data to be able to assess the value of different channels, like a television or radio or print or digital, to achieving outcomes for the company. I think as we look at embracing modeling as a future for also digital advertising, it allows us to bridge those worlds, to take modeling on digital experiences and bring it and compare it on a more frequent basis to offline experiences, and be able to really understand how you impact consumer journeys from different ways. And that's predicated on embracing a fundamental core of what we're talking about, which is moving away from precision era to predictive era ways of measuring our digital marketing. So that could be a real positive aspect for any given CMO, to be able to use a modeling that you use to understand your digital advertising, to also evaluate your print and your television and other things like that. So this is a small example of how this is pushing us, I think, in a better direction for a lot of brands out there.
So I have to ask you a question based on what you just said, going from precision to predictive. The reason I bring this up, because even think today, although all of these changes are happening, it's still very easy to get in this discussion, well, our Google Analytics data is 5% off from our CRM data, or it's 5% does not match here, or between the other platforms. And yes, we certainly, hypothetically, right, we understand, well, this is likely to continue to happen, and the gap is going to continue to widen. But how do we explain this to our leadership that might be looking at this and say, well, that doesn't match up, I cannot trust any of this, go and redo. And well, it's not possible to redo it, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think this is one of the false levels of precision we have from the cookie-based world, the digital identity world we live in now. There's a false sense of like specificity around of what you can get, and you can map potentially all the different interactions you have with the consumer and be able to understand the exact path by which they, go experience your brand and go, you go achieve outcomes with them you care about. I think it's been false from day zero, and I've been in this industry for over 12 years. There's always been a lack of data in some respects. And one thing that might not be always obvious to those that don't work in a platform business like Google's is that we've had to use modeling for many years to be able to do basic things like reach and frequency management. Like we haven't had all the data we want because people turned their cookies off in the past. And more recently, Apple's, approach to privacy and cookie generation have eliminated identity in those environments for a long time, and it's accelerating. So a lot of the tools out there, ours included, are using predictive approaches and modeling to be able to do something as basic as frequency and reach management, and been doing a good job of it for years. And I think what we have to understand is like there is a way to bridge into the future and be able to do that with this kind of marketing, this digital marketing go forward basis. And I think we all probably could do with a refresh of how we talk about this amongst the platform providers, the service providers, the brands out there, to understand, you don't have that level of precision in other types of marketing, and you believe in that efficacy, and you understand that there is a little bit of squishiness, that directionally you have good information, and you have the ability to test and iterate and try different approaches. And I think we just have to understand that's true for digital as much as it's true for print and television, right? But that we actually, those are our DNA. We're going to want to measure this in a real way, in a very sophisticated way. So why don't we bring that DNA into that modeling world and run things like MMMs on a weekly or monthly basis? It's a challenge to us all, so we can understand the value to our channels effectively, all the time, and be able to iterate and test and experiment in different ways to see, if there are different ways to reach consumers and how effective they are. So I think it's an interesting reset moment, right, for us all. Across all forms of advertising, and it's fun to do this kind of work and to do it with partners like yourselves. You guys bring such sophistication to the table on this topic and such capabilities.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because I'm sure that out of a couple hundred people that are watching this right now, and more that will watch the recording of this, somebody is probably looking at this and thinking, MMM, that sounds great, but who within my organization, right? We already are strapped, and on one side, I keep hearing we gotta do more in-house. On another, I keep hearing, look, you have to work with partners. You want to work with partners. What's your take on this? How organizations should be thinking about what we continue to build in-house, and how do we focus on our core business? Where do partners come in? Share some thoughts on the topic.
It is a bit of a polarity, is a framework I like, where there's these different ways of talking about something, where you often get caught up saying one is right and one is wrong. Local versus global is a good one, but it's not that there's a right or wrong. It's just in a moment in time you're swinging between the polarities, and you have to understand where you are right now. I think fundamentally, I think what we're looking at is a moment that's, if you broaden our lens even further beyond this big change in the industry, is you're seeing a moment of digital transformation for most enterprises across all aspects of their business. And I think the pandemic has highlighted that in really very interesting ways in big industries like media and entertainment, and consumer packaged goods and fast food, those kind of things, retail operations, that there is an opportunity, they're seeing this acceleration of digital touch points throughout with consumers, and the ability to understand and track that, and have, understanding of like the value of that, and create efficiencies perhaps, but also it creates a lot of complexity, right? It creates a lot of complexities. It breaks normal silos within the organization. It requires a different way of thinking about the organization. So there's in this polarity, outsourcing, well, using a service partner versus, doing it yourself. I think you need to be able to do both. Like you need to be able, as an enterprise, be able to own your own data, right? You have to be able to, create, like the right data sets and the right experiences that drive the right value to consumers. And then that generates data that then you can mine for like what makes that valuable. And you have to be able to then connect the dots between different parts of that experience, between different data lakes, if you will, of experience within your enterprise. So like in that sense, you need to be able to very primarily own that digital experience and be able to, then extract value for the consumer, give value to the consumer and extract value in terms of data from them. So that's what you as an enterprise need to do. But it's really hard to do that in all aspects of enterprise well without, you just aren't going to have all the people. Most people are not digital natives like a Netflix or an Amazon, right? They don't naturally understand how to operate in this very digital context and be able to get that data. So you're going to have to rely on service partners to be able to do that. Companies like yourselves, like InfoTrust. It is important that you be able to like play in both areas. So I think that's how I'd summarize it. Like go own your experiences, go own the data you have, but look toward your partners, be able to provide value in developing those experiences, perhaps. Doing analysis on those experiences, and you have the ability with a company like yourself to like pick and choose where you have people that do it versus where an InfoTrust has people who do it, right? Like you have modularity and the ability to do that. So hopefully that helps, but that's my perspective. I think you need to be able to do both, like because you can't walk away from owning those customer relationships,
of course,
but at the same time you can't possibly do everything, right? It's just too much.
So you've mentioned the owning customer relationships. Obviously, it's a big theme throughout the conference today, and the importance of first-party data strategy. So the message, it seems like, has been covered quite a bit, not just today, but even over the past couple of months, as everyone is saying this, yet not everyone is doing it. Do you have any suggestions on how to finally kind of put your stake in the ground and say, this is what we are after when it comes to our first-party data strategy?
It's so contextual to the brand, but I will give you some elements we're seeing within Google. And we obviously work with virtually every type of company around for digital marketing. So I do see a little bit of a broader based. A simple thing that I've been talking about this for many years. Is mobile experience. Like so many people are accessing your brand through mobile environments, whether it's an app or a website. I almost can't believe I'm still saying it, but you still have to invest in that. And most people have not done enough. Our search business sees like really tremendously positive returns on digital advertising when you have a good mobile web landing page. Which is like such a table stakes 2008 kind of thing. It feels like, and yet it still is there. Related to that is as a commerce experience that that you can really have a good deep relationship with the consumer, even as like a CPG, even if you don't. You make toothpaste, you're going to sell toothpaste through, retail stores, but sometimes maybe you sell it directly for some reason. But that kernel of first party data, that those relationships is a kernel can use, a spine of information to understand how consumers generally respond to your brand and different experiences, right? So it allows you to do things through your channels effectively as much as directly, right? So there's a value in that. Even within the commerce experience, even if you don't have to rely primarily on your own shopping experience, you have merchant feeds, right? That you send to Amazon through their shopping experience, or to Google through our shopping experience. You have a relationship with maybe Shopify to handle the sort of the back end of the experience and be able to handle the merchant experience, the billing and such. All those can be optimized and made better. And most brands are simply not far enough along the curve along there. And that's where a lot of the opportunity lies, I think. We saw a lot of very traditional brands flip from, 80-20 offline, if we will, bricks and mortar, e-commerce, to the opposite during the pandemic. And they had to make very quick choices about like how they're going to do that, what they're going to do about how to make that experience worthwhile, if only to keep their business afloat until they can go back to their real retail ops. But now that that the retail operations are coming back, they're seeing like a really interesting relationship with consumers when they had it more direct and through their commerce experience. They want to grow that and continue doing that. And it also changes your relationship to marketing and advertising, because if your storefront is your marketing, right? If the way you reach consumers and bring them in through the door is not having a really good storefront and a great location, but you have like a really good marketing and presence, collaboration with other companies, then that changes how you do things. There's just a lot in there you have to unpack. And that's where a good strategic partner like InfoTrust or others that can do this work will be really valuable. Those are just a couple examples. There's many other ways to improve those first-party experiences from a digital perspective. I mean, as a consumer myself, like I'm always very frustrated with the inability of a company to understand who I am when I have a very direct relationship in different contexts, as on the phone versus chat versus email. You know, it's very disjointed. It's a classic problem for many enterprises that still isn't solved. But there's a lot of meat on the bone, if you will, a lot of opportunity. And to take Sean's point earlier, like we just need to have an adventurous mindset and start down this path. We need to start investing in this and getting there. And the nice thing about this, again, is that as you invest in things, these kind of things that are very future-proof, very durable, you're also investing in just fundamentally in your business and very interesting digital experiences that will yield much better relationships with consumers. And that's a good thing, but in both ways, both in a negative and a positive way.
Now, ultimately, building relationship with a consumer is as durable as it gets, right? No matter what happens to the technology, but those connections, that trust that you generate with the consumer, that will always stay with your brand, with your organization. And, you know, one of the things that I like when you listed those options, what the organization can and should be doing, again, to those who are attending the summit, it's not about let's go and do all of them tomorrow before the end of the week. It's the question is how do we design our experimentation matrix, and how do we start playing with 2 or 3 or 4 of those and seeing what the data is telling us. And we will likely see that, hey, some of these tactics are not right for us. And that's fine. But if you are not doing anything, you are likely going to be in a much worse shape than many of your competitors.
Yeah, I thought Sean made a good point earlier. Like the really adventuresome marketers that we work with, they fail a lot, and you have to be okay with failure. Failure doesn't mean there's no value in it. It's a lot of cases you still have some portion of the experiment that results in good successes, but also you learn faster when you fail.
Exactly.
And the edge of that envelope, then that means you're pushing out ahead. And it's just a moment of change, deep industry change right now. And moments of change are also, I mean, they're scary, but they're also opportunities quite substantially for, you know, companies that can take advantage of them.
One other topic that I wanted to discuss with you was something that Sean mentioned was around last mile, right? How do we make analytics part of our day-to-day practices? So it's not just something that analytics, big data, modeling exists somewhere within the organization. It's something that all of us get to benefit from. And certainly the culture of analytics, the culture of experimentation is so important. Do you have any suggestions as you meet with organizations for how to drive that culture of almost last-minute analytics, right? When it's available to all of us and used widely?
Yeah, it's a dangerous one for me because it's very contextual again. It's very much about what each company needs to do. One thing that we've seen that really resonates is attaching, as much as possible, finding a way to attach your marketing and advertising efforts against clients' business outcomes that matter fundamentally. Selling a car, raising brand awareness. It might be intermediate metrics, but let's maybe not talk about click-through rate or CPA, right? Like, let's get a little bit closer to what the company really cares about. And that makes it more apparent that the marketing and advertising you do isn't just a cost center, but a profit driver, right? That it has a fundamental role in what you're doing as a business that is very interesting and very positive. And that's going back to what I was talking about earlier, this idea of, you know, thinking about your marketing as your storefront. It's the way you talk to consumers in a very real way, and that it's not just a way to enhance the experience you have in other places, but as a primary way to have that. I think it's a good way to think of it. If that's the case, then you need to tie that marketing and advertising to the outcomes you care about, selling some shoes or, you know, driving retail traffic in a coffee shop or something like that. Like if you aren't thinking that way, then it's hard. That's very vague, I admit it, but that's the best answer I can give to you without like getting into the details of a given company, right? Where, I think, again, your team is very good at understanding what they're trying to do and connecting those dots.
And ultimately, it is how do we generate value for our organization? And certainly business value for each organization is dependent on their business, but everything that we do has to be tied to that outcome. Mm-hmm. So what does a 30, 60, 90-day plan look like as organizations begin thinking about this, and where should we start? What should we be accomplishing over the next 1-2 months? What are your recommendations for next steps?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, right now it's a classic, very simple 30, 60, 90, where you needed to assess where you stand today. Like that is a very first step. You need to take a step back, talk to some of your peers. If you have friends in the industry that are going through similar things, other CMOs, other VPs of marketing, director of marketing. It's good to hear what other people are doing. Talk to your platform partners like ourselves. Talk to your service partners like InfoTrust. Many of them, including you guys, are offering these these durability assessments. Google's working very hard to provide tool sets and frameworks to our partner ecosystem to be able to run those on our behalf and the way we think about it. And InfoTrust brings, I know, a lot of thought leadership on this topic. But look at where you are, like how much you rely on traditional cookies, how much you rely on traditional digital identity, and how you can start to migrate. So that's the first step, an assessment, right? The 60 to 90 thing is where you start to think about then what is the path to start to bring in some durable experiments that make the most sense, right? Durable approaches and tactics. You're probably doing a lot of things that are quite durable already. Maybe amplify those, or look at ways to do iterative tests where you kind of do an A/B test of, a durable approach that complements a more traditional approach to doing marketing. One example that is available today is geo-based attribution, which is a regression econometric model that looks at marketing at a zip code +4 kind of level, and looking at outcomes when you target at a geo-based level that drive outcomes you want on the other side of the business. And because there's no direct connection, there's no cookie required, it's very much like it's very much a statistical model looking at that. But we've been running those models for a while. I know you guys are good at them too. For the right kind of company, that's a very interesting test to run right now if you haven't done it before. See if if you have trying to drive traffic to certain retail locations, if you target at a certain geographic level, how that affects that retail traffic is an example. So start to look at the existing bench of opportunities that to do durable and start to experiment and start to migrate. Longer term, you look at 90 days plus, there's going to be other things coming, like new ways of audience targeting, like Flock and Fledge within the Privacy Sandbox and Chrome that will become available on our platform over the summer. We'll make available to our partners like InfoTrust soon to be able to do that. There's a measurement API coming there that you'll be able to get to. But these are all things that I think are a little bit further out, and we can do things now, today, that we don't have to wait for the big splashy ones that are all in the trade press. There's a lot of great durable tactics available today. I think for a measurement analytics partner like yourselves that are, I think the one that I would very much press on in in that 90-day framework is starting to look at the opportunity to run cookieless attribution across a part of the business and different ways. It's a different way of measuring this versus like multi-touch attribution or other more direct precision era approaches. Start to run more statistical models on measuring your capability or the impact of advertising, and start to understand how that can, you can maybe migrate to that increasingly as cookies go away. We're just seeing, that identity spine to degrade quite quickly. Maybe 60-70% of current programmatic inventory has a cookie or a device ID there now, and it's getting smaller with Apple's changes, and as consumers become more sensitive to this and turn off cookies. So it's just, the reality is this is not getting any better, if you will. It's, we're going the other way on identity. So, the more that you can use, modeling to be able to assess the value of what you do, the more important, the more you'll be able to operate in this environment.
Brilliant. And this kind of reminds me of popular saying, right? Don't wish that things were easy, wish that you were better. And today, throughout the presentation, I mean, we heard so many different tactics, ideas. You just mentioned cookieless attribution, other modeling options that are available to organizations. So we really laid out plenty of ideas and tools, tactics that everyone can start leveraging to really become even better at digital analytics, digital marketing. And there's certainly a very opportunistic future in sight.
Yeah. That analogy, I like that one. I'm a big bike rider and one of the heroes of the sport. I think I'm paraphrasing it badly. Spoke like as you get better, the pedaling doesn't get easier. You just go faster. Yeah, it's just what it is.
Any final thoughts for the audience? Anything? Any recommendations that you have?
Well, I think one thing, if you're here, this is great because you're already working with one of our best partners in the space around measurement and analytics. Thank you for working with us and working with InfoTrust. They've been an incredibly great partner in the U.S. for us for many, many years. So you're already off to a good start. I think one thing I would go back to again to the very beginning. Sean's messages are always good. Put the consumer at the center of your business and think about what they want, both in terms of digital privacy and respecting that, and then therefore migrating to a future we think that respects that, but also think about like the experiences that value them and how you can enhance those and build upon those, which then helps your privacy journey, right, through this. And then again, like this is something as we go down this path, like the reason Google wanted to talk about this, the Google Ads part of our business wanted to talk about this early without Chrome having made its final decision on when they're going to deprecate cookies. We wanted to go down this path with everybody, with our partners and with our advertisers. We wanted to have that blinker on for 20 plus blocks. We wanted to be able to take this journey together. It's very much an iterative model. I think, we really, really welcome people to embrace that and provide feedback along the way. I think as an industry, it's an opportunity for us to take this path together. And like I said earlier, like improve the digital advertising experience and the outcomes we're trying to drive over time. There's just a lot of upside in this. And it's not all downside. And then to close, performance is not at odds with privacy. We can have both, and we're convinced of that, and I hope everybody else will see the same. At the end of the day, we're all trying to talk to consumers and have a relationship with them, and consumer sentiment has changed. They want to have more control over digital identity, and we need to respect that. And so we just need to kind of rebuild our architecture around that, and we're confident we can do that. That all the advertising use cases we have out there today can be done in the future in this new architecture. So thank you for the time.
Jeremy, thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next summit.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Pat, back to you.
Awesome. Great summary and wrap up, Jeremy and Michael. Thank you so much. And Jeremy, I saw what you did there with the old bike reference and the whole Peloton giveaway. Very clever. You were not eligible to win, though, so sorry to drop that news on you. But thank you all for joining. Just a few last things here. You want to advance the slide? So we do have a survey we'd like you to fill out, if you wouldn't mind. Go ahead and do that. And then also, this is the end of the summit, but it's really the beginning of the journey. So through this link, you can go get more information about a business risk assessment and what that looks like. So please check that out and learn more about how we can help you start your privacy-centric advertising journey. We have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to that you're watching this on. So please go ahead and subscribe because we're putting a lot of great content to this all the time. And on our website, we have lots of great information as well in our resource section. So please check that out. And now, I guess without further ado, we can go ahead to the high production value wheel of destiny. So if you want to go ahead and present that. And we'll go ahead and spin it. See who the lucky winner is. Lots of names there, lots of attendees. And the name, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to read this. Looks like, who is that one? Nicholas, congratulations. You've got a winner. Someone's going to be soon getting a brand new Peloton. So congrats. Thanks for being here today, Nicholas, and everyone else who joined us. That concludes the summit. I did want to just say a few thank yous to some folks. So first of all, again, thank you all for being here. Thank you to all the speakers. You're all fantastic, just off the charts great. I do want to thank a lot of folks behind the scenes who made this happen from Google. Camille, Lauren, Andrew, Nick, Sean, Christopher, Ronnie, Ian. Apologize if I'm missing anybody. And then from InfoTrust, Don, Amanda, and the whole marketing team. Chase, who couldn't be here because he's back with his newborn son on paternity leave, and Adam, who really took the torch up from Chase and brought this home. And again, if I missed anyone, thank you so much for all the help. Great day, and we'll talk to y'all soon.